We're all set when you are, Your Worship.
Thank you. If I could get the members of council to come on screen. I would note that Councillor Parks is having a little bit of technical difficulty getting back in. She's trying as we speak. And as I noted earlier, Councillor Porter has indicated her regrets for this evening. I'm sure that Councillor Parks will be able to join us shortly. And with that said, I will call this meeting to order. This is a special session of council and for this virtual meeting for Monday, April the 4th. It is now 6:30. And I would remind everyone that this is a virtual session, but our rules of order, rules of procedure, code of conduct, and other pertinent legislation apply as usual, as if it were an in-person meeting. And if any member's connection to the meeting is dropped, we will pause for a moment to allow that member to reconnect. And if that member cannot reconnect, but we still have quorum, we will continue on with the meeting after a brief recess. With that said, and as noted, Councillor Parks is doing her best to enter. She's texting me as we talk. She's trying. Her computer froze. So the meeting is called to order. First up is the confirmation of the agenda. We have an agenda before us for this special meeting. Is there anything to add or edit to the agenda? And I do know that the clerk is going to raise her hand and ask that we adjust the sequence of the meeting. Is that right, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Your Worship. So just in consideration of the notice that went out for the public meeting, it did state that it was 7 p.m. So we're just going to, by Council's permission, is just change item 4.1 to follow 4.2 and 4.3. So basically just move 4.2 up and 4.3 and then 4.1 after.
And with that adjustment to the sequence, does anyone else have any other amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the amended adjustment? Councillor Townend, so moved. Councillor Buderick, seconding. Any comment? And seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried. So we will start then with item 4.2. I scroll down to it. Renewable Energy Fund Grant Review, Ward 1 Subcommittee. We have a series of recommendations, and I believe we turn to the chair of the Ward 1 Subcommittee, that being Councillor Townend, and to address this report.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I'd just like to express my my thanks and my gratitude to the committee and to the clerk and Mr. Renier. The meeting was a very successful meeting, and I'm very happy with the committee's work. The report speaks for itself. I thought maybe what I would do is, if there were any questions from members of council about any of the specific recommendations, I'd be able to provide more background if required.
Thank you. And with that, I would note that Councillor Parks has managed to join us. I'm glad her computer hasn't frozen again. And thank you for the report, Councillor Townend. Does anyone have any questions for Councillor Townend with regard to the report and the recommendation before us? I'll go to the deputy. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through you to the chair. I'm pretty sure you knew that I'd have to come up with some question, right? Recommendation number C, or letter C, has a grant with over 75%. Could we just get a little more explanation on that?
Yes, through you, Your Worship. The committee was happy to grant the Amherst Island Men's Society the amount that they've requested, but the committee wanted to draw to council's attention that in strict adherence to the policy, what they're asking for is more than 75% of their operating costs, which the policy states whichever amount is less. So the amount that they're asking for is actually more than the 75% of their operating costs. The committee was happy for council to use their prerogative to grant them what they're requesting, but the committee just wanted to draw attention to the fact that it didn't adhere strictly to the policy in that regard.
Okay, Deputy.
Thank you. Yes. Excuse me. Yeah, the other one's not a question, it's a comments.
Okay, any other questions for Councillor Townend as the chair before we go to comments? I'm seeing none. So before we ask for comments, I will ask for a motion to be on the floor. Would anyone like to make a motion with regard to the recommendations for the Ward 1 subcommittee report? Deputy?
I would move to receive and adopt recommendation number 1, amending item A to read for this particular applicant, we recommend inclusion to be included in contribution from Ward 2 and 3. And I'll explain if I get seconded.
Okay, I'm just clarity. The recommendation right now reads, I'll say ... and that future funding considerations for this particular applicant should include contribution from the Ward 2-3 stream. Can I get clarity on the variation in your motion, please?
Should be considered for contribution. I'm just adding a couple extra words in there.
Fair enough. Thank you. Okay. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Gordon, thank you. And Deputy, go ahead.
It's a somewhat of a minute point, but reading it the way it is, it's almost, it could be taken as direction to the other committee for it to be included, where we want that we basically, if I'm reading it correctly, they want the option to be included and for it to be identified that it is viable recommendation, or could be a viable application that would be for the benefit of the whole township and not just Amherst Island. So I just wanted to leave it that we weren't directing the other committee, but we were certainly making them aware of it.
Fair enough. And everyone have clarity on that? Okay, then I'll look for comments. I'll start with Councillor Townend.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Speaking on my own behalf, I'm content with that wording change. The committee definitely did not want to tie the hands of the other committee. That was certainly not the objective. The committee just simply wanted to bring to council's attention the unique challenge that the Amherst Island radio station represents, insofar as, even though it is, definitely to be considered an island organization, and the radio station itself is situated on the island, they are federally mandated to do what they do, and of course they do serve the whole township. And so it was simply just wanting to bring that to council's attention to be able to encourage them to apply to the Ward 2-3 stream as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Councillor Buderick, I saw your hand as well.
Yes, as chair of the Ward 2-3 committee, and we'll get to that later, but I'm definitely open to them being able to apply to our stream as well. They do serve the whole municipality. And I just wanted to put that out there before a vote that I think it's a good idea.
Thank you. Any other comments with regard to this motion? I'll add the minor bit that many of the volunteers that are involved in CJAI are also not necessarily island residents. Many are, but many are not. So I think it's well stated to say that it crosses the entire municipality. Any final comments? I'll go back to the mover. Anyone else? I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. We move to item 4.3, Renewable Energy Fund Grant Review Ward 2-3 Subcommittee. And we turn to the chair of that, Councillor Budrick.
Yes, 3 applications. Obviously, we're going to see a bit of comment on the third one, but it would have been nicer to see a few more applications and a little more ambition on projects, but I know it's early. And hopefully people watching this and we can get the word out that it's definitely something that is here to benefit the community. And I would also like to thank not only the clerk and the deputy treasurer, but also bringing in Ms. McFarland in our second meeting to clarify a few items, and our Heritage, Culture, and Tourism group for clarifying a few things as well as in our second meeting. I always need to remember to thank the people that work hard, and that's my fault. That's my fault.
Thank you very much, Councillor Budrick. Does anyone have any questions with regard to the report for Councillor Budrick? I'm seeing no questions. Oh, I'll go to the deputy. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through you to Councillor Budrick. As you'd meant, item C does not have a dollar value with you. It's just being received. Could we just get a little clarification on that?
So under the committee rules, money cannot go towards paying salaries. And that's basically where it was at. However, if we don't come up with this money, which came out of the community fund before that helped do that, this program will not go where the Fairfield House is actually staffed for with a couple summer students from Wednesdays to Sundays throughout the 11 weeks from basically late spring into the summer. They were originally asking for $3,000. That would have covered their requirements. It was far under. It was only in about the 25 to 33% of their actual ask for their budget. But because it was a gray area in the rules, we had to come to council this way to discuss it. And if the clerk could help me out if I missed anything, that would be awesome too.
Madam Clerk?
I believe the chair picked up on all the points that were discussed at the meeting.
Thank you. Are there any other questions with regard to this report? Seeing no further questions, can I get a motion, please? The chair is allowed if you okay, I see the deputy's hand.
Move to receive the report and adopt recommendation number 1, part A, B, and C.
And okay, I'll take that. That is so moved. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Townend. Right. Before I go further, do we need clarity and some statement beyond that for item C? Is this pending council making a decision? Councillor Budrick, go ahead.
I can just reiterate that the ask was $3,000, and that's what they were looking for to help with their budget. So if that's acceptable by the mover and the seconder, then that was the number they were inquiring about.
And I'll come back to the mover.
Okay. I would just ask for one more question of clarification, if I could.
Go ahead.
To Councillor Budrick, please. The way I read that was it was being denied because it didn't meet the criteria. The way I may be reading it incorrectly, so it's, I guess what we're looking for is in the motion, we may grant it this time while they work at other avenues to be able to get funding in the future. Am I interpreting correctly now?
So they used to be a member, they used to get funding through Community Grant Fund. Obviously that moved to the Renewable Grant Fund from what we did. This ask is marginally more than they used to get. But we did kind of go through with the Heritage, Culture and Tourism group that if they don't get the funding and the timing, because we don't meet again until June, this programming will not happen at all. If we were unable to fund them, and this, like I said, I know was in the neighborhood of 25 to 30% of their full budget.
Thank you, Councillor Buderick. Deputy?
Okay. I'll propose a amended motion then, and if it's seconded, then I'll speak to it. So part C would be the committee accepts the proposal. So we can go 1AB and 2C granted at the requested value.
The $3,000.
Yeah, I heard 2,500 or 3,000, so I don't want to say the wrong number. So whichever is so if 3,000 was requested, then that number.
I'll go to the clerk for that clarity, if I could.
Sorry, I have to get my mouse onto the unmute. Yes, it was for 3,000, I believe.
Okay, we can put 3,000 in then, that's fine.
So the proposed amendment to the motion would have item 1C replaced with 2C, that the Fairfield Homestead Heritage Association application be granted at $3,000. That is your proposed amendment. Does the seconder consider that a friendly amendment?
I do, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Then that is the motion before us at this time. Mover, any further comment?
Just very briefly, I had to put a little thought into that because the first time we do it, you want to try and keep things as close to the policy as you can, with the understanding, as Councillor Buderick provided a little more explanation, this is a learning curve for everyone, and going from one stream of funding to another stream of funding, we're going to see some growing pains, and also potentially some, as has been mentioned, proposed amendments to the policy, which will better serve the community. So that's why in this case, I think it's a very valid request. I think it's a very valid organization to receive the funds. And a part of the growing pains is for us to put some thought into our motions, which eventually I did.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Seconder, did you have comment?
Only, Your Worship, that I agree with the deputy's comment, and indeed, the same issues exist for for the Ward 1 subcommittee. Our expectation is, as was detailed in the report, that hopefully following the second intake, that there might be some review of the policy. These things are living documents, and I am sure that we will continue to make improvements, which will ultimately make the application process more accessible.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any other comments with regard to the motion that's before us? Councillor Parks, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment that I agree with what the deputy and Councillor Town have mentioned. Councillor Buderick basically summed it up very well, that not everything fits into a nice, neat little box. And this document is evolving as things continue to, or as applications continue to come in. So I'm encouraged to see that we're moving forward with this anyways.
Thank you. Any other comment? No further comment. I will call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you both. Thank you to both the chairs and to the committees that supported those chairs and helped to make those recommendations to this council. With that, it is 6:51, and as the clerk noted at the beginning of the meeting, that we are officially scheduled to have this public meeting with regard to the planning application for 7 o'clock. And Councillor Townend?
I was just going to propose, Your Worship, to move to take a 10-minute recess.
And I'll take that motion. And do I have a seconder for a 10-minute recess? Councillor Parks, thank you. Any comment? And is the clerk able to put up a meeting is in recess until 7 o'clock type message?
I don't know that it'll be quite that detailed, but we'll get something up for sure.
Thank you very much. I will call the vote. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Motion is carried. We are in recess until 7 o'clock. Please don't leave the meeting. Just turn your screens and mics off. I could get council to come back on screen. And with that, I will call the meeting back to order. We have been in recess for a few moments as we started this meeting a little bit earlier than anticipated, and we needed to wait until 7 o'clock for the public meeting item considered under item 4. And I'm just realizing, Madam Clerk, that I don't believe I did the disclosure of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof in the original agenda sequence. So I shall do it now. Is there any member who wishes to disclose a disclosure of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof? Seeing none, we will move forward. So at this time, we go into a public meeting. A public meeting is being held in accordance with the provisions of Section 3412 and 15120 of the Planning Act, RSO 1990, to consider an amendment to the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 2001-38 as amended and a draft plan of subdivision. The proposed draft plan of subdivision applies to lands described as part of Lot 35, Concession 1, and Lot 12, Plan 29M-21. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment applies to the same lands along with 33 County Road 6. I'm not going to read the whole thing. We will hear in person or by their agent or solicitor any person who claims to be affected by this application. We will start with, I see our director, Ms. Merritt is here. Okay. Ms. Merritt, do you have anything to report with this?
Through you, Your Worship, yes, thank you. Ms. Furness will have a brief presentation for this report, as it is a recommendation report.
Thank you. Is Ms. Furness here? There she is.
Yep, perfect.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this application tonight, this is the second public meeting we're having for this file. It's for both the draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment application for lands located in part of Lot 35, Concession 1, which is located in Amherst on the east side of County Road 6, south of Kildare Avenue, primarily affecting the lands where the dance studio is located. The draft plan of subdivision consists of 33 single dwelling lots, 5 lot addition blocks to be conveyed to 5 property owners located on Island View Drive, as well as a parkland block, 2 walkway blocks, and an extension of McDonough Crescent, as well as a new right-of-way. The zoning amendments to rezone the lands that are currently zoned R36 and community facility zone to a special site-specific residential zone that includes various performance standards to implement the subdivision. So primarily your front yard setback, interior side yard setback, lot coverage. The proposed zone provisions for the subdivision are consistent with other subdivisions in the township and will allow for a suitable building envelope on the lots. The zoning amendment also includes rezoning those 5 lot addition blocks to the same residential zone as the properties on Island View so that they can have consistent zoning and not have split zoning on their properties. In addition, a portion of the community facility zone that's currently located on 33 County Road 6 that was subject to a previous lot addition application at the Committee of Adjustment is also being rezoned as part of this to a residential zone, again, to make that property consistent and have the same zoning on the property. An open house was held in October and the first public meeting was held in December. Public comments were received in support of the proposed lot addition blocks to the residents on Island View, and some concerns were raised by residents for any potential trail that would be located to the rear of their properties. The final proposal does include the lot additions as well as the 2 walkways to connect to County Road 6. So as the lot additions are included in the recommendation this evening, we're not aware or have not heard any concerns from the public in regards to the applications tonight. A number of studies have been submitted to support the applications. The reports have all been reviewed by staff and applicable agencies and are deemed to be acceptable. Particular recommendations from a number of these studies are being implemented through the recommendation as draft plan conditions that will be dealt with during the detailed design stage of the subdivision. The staff's opinion that the applications are an appropriate infill development in the urban settlement area that will connect the existing subdivision, will contribute to the increase in housing supply. And there's also sufficient infrastructure and capacity available to support the development. And the application also meets the low density threshold as the lands are designated low density in the official plan. So that's complied with as well. So overall, staff are of the opinion that the applications are consistent with the provincial policy statement, conform to the county's official plan, the Loyalist Township official plan, and meet the general intent of the zoning bylaw. And we're therefore recommending approval of both the draft plan of subdivision with conditions and the associated zoning bylaw amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, do you have any questions for Ms. Furness at this time? Seeing no questions for Ms. Furness, this is a public meeting. I will turn to the audience. Remind everyone that if you wish to speak on this issue, on this application, I would encourage you to use the raise hand feature in Zoom if you're able to indicate that you wish to make a presentation or make comment on this application tonight. And I turn to the clerk. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone in the audience who is indicating that they wish to present?
Through your worship, not at this time.
Okay. Anyone wishing to make presentation or comment? I know a number of you were here or were present for the previous discussion with regard to the land, the lot adjustments and the pathway. I believe that has now been resolved. I see a hand up. Madam Clerk, are you able to bring Chris and Amanda Clayton in?
They've been invited in, your worship.
Yeah. Welcome to the Claytons. If you're able to hear us, we can see that you are on the panel at this time, but you're muted currently, so we won't be able to hear you.
Hello. Yes. Sorry.
Welcome.
Yeah. No, we're just, again, we've been on the call a couple times now, but we're just reassuring that we're approving of John's plan, and we would be very much appreciative of that if that gets approved. So thank you very much again for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak in this public meeting? I was muted there for a moment. Anyone else wish to speak in this? That's okay. Anyone else wish to speak in this public meeting? I'm seeing no other hands. I do note that there are a lot of clauses, I believe 56 clauses within this particular recommendation. Through to staff, I'm sure you have, but can you confirm that all of these conditions and clauses have been had the developer has been advised and understands them?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, the draft plan conditions and the zoning bylaw itself were both sent to the developer as well as the developer's engineer, and we were advised that there were no concerns.
Thank you. And I'd see a hand now. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Jocelyn's been invited to attend. Yep.
And we'll say welcome, Mr. Jocelyn. Again, we can see there you are.
There we go. Yeah, yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Murray Jocelyn, Jocelyn Engineering. representing the developer. I just wanted to confirm, yes, that we've reviewed the proposed conditions of draft plan approval and are in agreement with them.
Excellent. Thank you. And any further comment? No. Council, do we have any questions for Mr. Jocelyn? I don't think so. Okay, thank you all. There's no further comments. That satisfies the public meeting. I will close that portion of the public meeting and turn back to council. Council, what would you like to do with the report and recommendations? Anyone wish to make a deputy? Go ahead.
Move to receive and adopt the recommendations.
Motion to receive and adopt. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Parks, thank you. I don't know if your internet might be slow, Councillor Townend. I saw your hand after the fact each time. Mover, any comment? No? Seconder comment? Anyone else would like to make comment on this? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you very much, and thank you to all who came to witness or participate in the public meeting. With that, that brings us to the end of our agenda for the special meeting of council. So I'll ask for a motion for the confirmatory bylaw. Councillor Parks, so moved. Councillor Buderick seconds. Thank you. And any comment? I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried. And then I will ask for a motion to adjourn the special meeting of council. I will note that we will stay in this Zoom meeting as we continue on to the committee of the whole. Okay. So can I get a motion to adjourn, please? Deputy, seconded by Councillor Buderick. Thank you. Any comment? I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Motion is carried. Thank you. So we are adjourned from our special council meeting, and we will now turn to our committee of the whole. So at this time, I would welcome all attendees to our committee of the whole and make note that this is a virtual meeting, and as such, all rules of order, code of conduct, and all relevant legislation applies to this meeting as if it were held in person. If any member of the committee loses connection, I will pause for a moment to allow them to reconnect, but assuming we still have quorum, continue on with the meeting. So we call the committee of the whole to order at 7:13. We have an agenda before us. Is there anything to add or edit on this agenda? I'm seeing no hands. Madam Clerk has shaken her head. Then I will ask for a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Councillor Parks, thank you. Seconded by Deputy. Thank you. Any comment? I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Motion is carried. Thank you. Is there any disclosure of the pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof? Seeing no declarations, we report that there was no closed session this evening. So we move to item 5.1, special events bylaw. First report. And we have the report before us. And which member of staff is going to lead this? Ms. McFarland, our director.
Through your worship, actually, our manager of Heritage, Culture and Tourism has a brief presentation to walk you through the potential options for changes. And I see Lindsay is here now.
Thank you. Welcome, Ms. T.
Hello, thank you. I'll share my screen here. Maybe, bear with me.
It'll work.
It'll work, maybe. I'm going to try this and see.
It appears that you are sharing, and not sure that you're on the right screen. There we are.
Is that up?
And it appears up. Can my council see it? I'm seeing nods. Yes, go ahead.
Wonderful. Perfect. Well, thank you, Your Worship, and good evening, council staff and members of the public. The purpose of our presentation this evening is to discuss Special Event Bylaw 2018-003 and to present opportunities for change, including a process for assisting with special events within the township. So to begin with a bit of background, the Special Event Bylaw was implemented in 2018. The bylaw encompasses regulations for events held both on township and private properties. And it's been indicated to staff that the bylaw and the application process can sometimes be a bit onerous, and it can deter community members wishing to host events within the township. On average, there are approximately 5 recurring applications per year. Since 2018, 3 of these applications were one-offs, and to date, only 1 application has been denied and the event did not take place on that property. So although the current bylaw is not extremely outdated, internal structures and processes have changed since its creation, initiating the opportunity for a bylaw review. In 2001, the Heritage, Culture, and Tourism Division was created, resulting in a team of dedicated staff to support and strengthen community and cultural development. Simultaneously, in 2001, the township introduced a new park rental process on township property that now addresses event requirements. This change to park rentals created a new avenue for booking use of township outdoor spaces, which impacted the traditional process for hosting events on township property. These changes sparked the review of the merits for a special event bylaw and on township property, as we want to ensure that there is no duplication in work. During the review, liability enforcement were also identified as opportunities for improvement. Staff identified challenges regarding the enforcement of the bylaw and the resulting legal responsibility that the township has with such a bylaw in place. Under the Municipal Act, the township can issue special event permits on private property. Through consultation, staff were advised that permitting special events without proper enforcement can actually result in a greater liability to the township, regardless of whether the event takes place on public or private land. If council wishes to accept the additional risk and liability by continuing to permit events on private property, adjustments to the current bylaw enforcement contract may need to be made to ensure that enforcement is available during event operations. In the case of an emergency during an event, whether on public or private property, the Lennox and Addington OPP and Loyalist Emergency Services hold the most authority in ensuring safety and cooperation to the public. Staff conducted outreach to neighboring municipalities to gather information on internal processes, procedures, and best practices during the review. Of the 9 municipalities that were contacted, all had a very similar approach. Each municipality has a permit process for events taking place on municipally owned property, some more formal than others. Only 2 of the 9 municipalities contacted have a bylaw that regulates events being held on private property. The other 7 municipalities openly encourage event planners to consult with staff during their event planning process, and staff provide best practices and resources for hosting a safe event. If council decides to rescind Special Event Bylaw 2018-003, staff will follow the same approach used by other municipal counterparts and support event hosts planning events on private property in 3 ways. We will offer an informative event planning page and guide on the township's website. The current 22-page events manual will be reformatted into an event planning guide and shared on the website in an easy-to-use drop-down format. This digital process is similar to what the other municipalities are doing and can be modeled after a nice approach taken by the municipality of Port Hope. Event hosts will also be encouraged to contact staff to discuss their event plans. Staff will offer best practices and recommendations by providing resources and insight into both municipal and third-party requirements for hosting events. And through conversation with the event host, staff will be able to identify any concerns and, if necessary, notify the appropriate authorities. For events taking place on township property, staff representatives from both the Heritage, Culture, and Tourism Division and the Recreation and Facilities Division have partnered to draft a special event management procedure. This procedure will streamline the process for potential event hosts, all while creating more efficient internal processes. The draft procedure will streamline roles and responsibilities for staff, provide a user-friendly process for public inquiries, and result in improved customer service and support for the event host. Events being proposed on township property will be classified as either a facility rental, a sport tournament, an outdoor small-scale event, or an outdoor large-scale event. Definitions of each event and the classifications will be communicated on the township's website with easy-to-follow step-by-step instructions for booking within each category. Event organizers will be encouraged to contact staff for support. For events which are classified as outdoor small scale and outdoor large scale events, an easy to use online application form will be launched. The application will include a list of drop-down questions which will be generated depending on the event host response. This approach will modernize and streamline our current 13-page application process. Outdoor small-scale event applications will be reviewed in a 5-step process in consultation between the Heritage, Culture, and Tourism Division and the Recreation and Facilities Division. Outdoor large-scale event applications will be reviewed by an event review panel comprised of township staff and potential third-party agencies, depending on the scope of the event in question, in a more detailed 8-step process. As an example, the traditional Santa Claus parade hosted by the Amherst Lions Club would be defined as an outdoor large-scale event, as it would require additional townships licenses and permits beyond that of a facility rental. Organizers of the event would complete the online application that would auto-populate together feedback relevant to their event planning. The staff member responsible for event management would receive the online application, review, and consult with the event organizers and members of the event review panel to finalize the details and requirements. The Bath Sunday Market, for example, would be defined as an outdoor small-scale event, as it is an experience that does not require any additional township licenses or permits beyond a facility rental. Organizers of the event would complete the online application. The staff member responsible would receive the application, review, and consult with the event organizer to confirm the details. With no additional township licenses or permits required beyond the facility rental, the event would be approved pending park rental and insurance requirements have been met. So in conclusion, we're asking that the Committee of the Whole recommend one of the following options to Council. Option 1 is to rescind Special Event Bylaw 2018-003 and replace it with the 2-step process, an internal process managed by staff in collaboration with the event host that regulates the events on township property, and an ongoing outreach program and improved website content that encourages event organizers hosting events on private property to consult with staff to discuss and receive resources, best practices, and contacts necessary to host a safe event. Or option 2, to adapt Special Event Bylaw 2018-003 to differentiate between events being held on public property and township property. As public health restrictions are eased and from the ongoing pandemic, it is anticipated that the active residents and community mobilizers will be eager to help bring social vibrancy back to the township. Refining how events are managed on township property will provide a more welcoming, user-friendly platform to promote increased social vibrancy. So thank you for your time, and we are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. T. Excellent presentation. Council, do I have any questions at this time? And I'll go to the deputy.
Thank you. You've already answered some of my questions just in the presentation alone, so well done. I just have a couple, and you may not be able to answer these yet because it's sort of looking down the road a little bit, but do you envision when the new procedures, the new documents are developed, some of the, I guess what I'm looking at is I like the idea of reducing restrictions on private property and allowing people to enjoy it. the flip side to that is sometimes it does impact other people, other users of our infrastructure. So things like traffic plans, especially in large events in rural areas where the roads aren't made really for heavy traffic, or it could be in a more built up area, but would impact other residents. So I guess that's my one question is, do you envision there being, during the conversation, bringing up things such as traffic control plans, things like that, just to ensure that they have considered all the safety concerns that they need to?
So through you, your worship, absolutely. During the conversations that staff would have with the event hosts on private property, we would be providing them with details regarding traffic control and safety measures, discussing road closures and what's involved within a road closure when one might be necessary, and providing them as much guidance as possible. We can also help direct them to emergency services in liaison between emergency services and the event host if there are questions or concerns that they may have.
Thank you. And this is another one that you may not be able to answer at this time, but when you're developing the new documents, are you planning or do you envision providing an opportunity for some of the regular users, event organizers, to give some input? And I'm thinking of, you named a couple there with the market, the Santa Claus parade. There's other ones where it's a routine, they routinely are getting the permits. And if there's an opportunity to glean some of the information from them.
Yeah, through your worship, absolutely. With it being a procedure, it'll be a living document that we will be able to evaluate as we go and revise as we go to make sure that the process is working for everyone.
Thank you. That's all, your worship.
Okay. Anyone else have questions or comments? Councillor Buderick, go ahead.
So, for example, if there were an event on a private property and they didn't come to the township, would there be any repercussions to the people having an event on private property that did not come to the township and speak to them about it happening going forward and looking for assistance? I mean, this is just a hypothetical question, but you never know, because obviously this might not get out to the public where an event may happen and they might not have full understanding where this could kind of be a bit of an issue, that's all.
Through you, your worship, yes, we would, sorry, Councillor Buderick, if you don't mind just repeating the question there.
So would there be any repercussions? So for example, I know of a specific, which I'm not going to name, but I know that it has a slight police presence that would never ask for a permit. It's on private property. And I highly doubt they would probably come to the township looking for assistance. It's run for a few years now without incident. And I was just curious if there was any repercussions if they didn't come to the township to speak to them about it before happening, being that it is on private property.
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, your worship. So the township's current bylaws and permits would still exist. So something like a noise bylaw exemption would still come into play if the event host requires a noise bylaw exemption, a road closure, a building permit, all of those types of applications, licenses and permits would still apply to the event host. So right now with the overarching special event permit, that would no longer exist in that situation, but the event host would still be required to follow township policy and procedure.
Okay. And anyone else have questions or comments? Deputy.
Down to just a comment. Looking at this, I'm actually encouraged by this. I like the idea. I'm big on people being able to enjoy their property as long as it's done properly. And from what I've read in the report and the answers that have been provided here, as well as the presentation, I think there's ways that we can ensure that both are being done. People have use of their property, but doing it responsibly. And I like the idea of the positive spin on it as well, that if they come to the township and talk to us, we're a resource. You know, they always look at it that we're the hammer, where we are a resource that's available as well. And usually if we can work with them with that in mind, I think we could be very successful, and the organizations could expand and hopefully bring in new organizations to have events in the area and promote the area. So thank you. I really appreciate you bringing this forward, and I like the approach.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Again, this is committee of the whole, so it's open for discussion. I'm going to throw in a challenge question, if you will. Right? There's a huge benefit to, I'll say, enabling staff to make decisions and to following procedure to work with our residents. It speeds up the processes. It removes a lot of the red tape. That's certainly a good thing. It does leave staff required to follow the rules as printed, as the policy is developed. Are you envisioning for lack of a better term, what I'll call an appeal process? If and this is specific to the on township property events, if you've discussed it with a proponent, laid out the conditions, laid out the circumstances in which that can happen, and the proponent doesn't like those, is there an appeal process? Is there something that can take place? Or are you envisioning something along those lines?
So, Your Worship, great question. And it's not something that we've considered to date, but it's a great point and something that we can definitely take into consideration further as we define the process.
Thank you. Anyone else? I'm seeing no further comment or question. We do have a recommendation before us, just basically a choice. What do you want to do, council? Deputy?
Move to receive and adopt recommendation 1A.
Move to receive and adopt recommendation 1A. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Gordon, thank you. Deputy, any further comment? Councillor, any further comment? Anyone else have comment? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried. And again, thank you, Ms. T and Ms. McFarland, for bringing this forward and bringing us up to speed with special events. Thank you. Next up,
thank you.
We have donation policy update and water leak forgiveness adjustment policy. And we have Mr. Dickey here. And welcome, sir. And Mr. Anye. And Mr. Dickey, do you have comment to add to this report?
Yes, just the Deputy Treasurer, Phil, has put together a presentation that he'll share, and just to walk council through kind of the highlights of what's in the report and then the updated policies. And then he's available, as well as Brianne's available for questions.
Excellent, thank you. Mr. Renier, going to make a...
Yeah, I can go ahead and share my screen, Your Worship.
Go ahead, sir.
All right. Look okay?
We can see that. Can everyone see that? I'm seeing nods. Go ahead.
Perfect. Yes. So as Mr. Dickey said, here tonight just to discuss a few policies to get your opinion on. First, we're just gonna talk about an updated donation policy. And then afterwards, we're bringing forth a water leak forgiveness adjustment policy for council's consideration. That's been a long time coming. So first, we're just bringing an updated donation policy. It's a policy governing the receipt of donations to Loyalist Township in cash or in kind. So this policy was first adopted by council in 2004 and last revised in 2011. And the purpose of this policy is really just to set the guiding principles for the receipts of donations by the township, always thinking in accordance with the guidelines as set out by the CRA. And this policy has been updated just to ensure that we are adhering to the latest guidance from the CRA. So I'm not going to go through everything in it, but one of the main things in this updated policy is we included a lot more language around gifts in kind. And I have the definition there, but basically gifts in kinds can include a wide variety of things, and they're basically non-cash gifts or gifts of property. So it could be things like artwork, equipment, securities, real property. And we did have an example of that this year with some land donation. So there is a list here of these are the things. So anytime we're going to get a gift in kind per the policy, there's a number of factors to review and consider before the township, I guess, accepts the gift in policy. And this is just a list of some of the things to consider. So, for example, making sure that it's in compliance with any bylaws, policies, or external legislation, that there is no conflict of interest or potential for the appearance of a conflict of interest in accepting a gift in kind. The reputational risk associated with accepting a donation from a particular donor. Just the usefulness of the donation, the condition and the value of the donation. And something that we always need to consider before accepting is the future cost, benefit, risk. So are there things, if it's a piece of artwork, what is the cost of the installation? Is it something we're going to have to maintain over time? Do we have to take out insurance on it? Are there additional costs in addition to accepting the gifts in kind? So these are just some of the things. So we built up the language in this updated policy. Just these are the things that we do review when potentially accepting gifts in kind and bringing that to council. One of the other things is the updated policy does speak to some very specific exclusions within the policy that does not fall under donation. The two in the policy are listed here. The first one's a little wordy, but basically inbound funding or grants to the township for the purpose of delivering community service or provisions of infrastructure. So that basically speaks to higher levels of government and their funding and their grant support. And the other one is sponsorship arrangements with the township. And I'll speak to that a little bit later on. I'm going to speak about some of the ineligible things, but basically sponsorship arrangements within the township would be excluded from the donation policy. So when we think of the donation policy, I think most people think about when the township does issue official tax receipts. And we just want it to be really clear going forward when we do issue taxation receipts as Loyalist Township. So all three of these criteria must be met in order for us to issue a official donation tax receipt for CRA. So there must be an actual transfer of property to the township, either in cash or kind. So we must be given something. Number two, it must be voluntarily made by the donor, and it can't be because of a contractual or legal agreement. So it can't be we can't receive something as part of, let's say, a site plan agreement for something. That's part of executing an agreement. That doesn't fall in under the donation policy. And three, we have set a minimum as the value of the donation must be $20 or more for us to issue a donation receipt. And that's our policy, and that's more around administration. And that's a pretty typical amount you see. So one of the big questions around us in issuing donation receipts that's come up in the past, and we wanted to make sure we're clear on, is the issue of charitable activities and control. So what that means is the township can only issue tax receipt donations to gifts to other qualified donees, or to carry on our own controlled charitable activities or events as prescribed by the CRA. So what's that saying is basically the township cannot be used as a flow through. People can't give us money to flow through to somebody that's not able to issue a charitable receipt just so they can get the tax receipt through us. That's pretty much a fancy way of saying that. And this is the definitions of what classifies as something that would be owned by the township or something that's controlled by the township. So for the most part, you're going to see events or organizations or committees that are controlled by the township. And what the requirements are for the CRA is that the township must appoint more than 50% of the governing members, and they must also submit their operating budget to the township. So those are very important things when we're talking about being a flow through. So I did just want to talk about what would be ineligible for us to issue official tax receipts for. So again, as first point there is donations that are intended as a flow through to a specified non-qualifying donee. And a non-qualifying donee, for simplistic purposes, is somebody that wouldn't be able to issue their own official tax receipt. So again, we can't be used as a flow through. For things such as intangible properties, such as service, time, skills, and effort. So we don't issue a donation receipt because someone donated their time to help us with something. That would be an example under that. Here we talk again about sponsorships in the form of cash, goods, or services in return for a commercial benefit. So what that means is if somebody has a sponsorship agreement, for example, someone sponsors a rink board at the rink, they're getting commercial advertising for that. That is not eligible for a donation receipt. Transfers of cash, property, or assets resulting from a condition, i.e. a court order, site plan agreements, things of that nature, those are not eligible donations. And then also, if we did receive a gift in kind for which we cannot determine a reasonable fair market value, we cannot issue a donation receipt for that. So just to conclude, I just want to quickly highlight the roles and responsibilities under the donation policy. So in this policy, CAOs and directors have the authority to accept donations of up to $10,000 in value. Anything beyond that must come to council to be approved to accept that donation. That's typically not an issue at this time. The treasurer or the treasurer's designate is responsible for the administration, revision, interpretation of the policy. They're also responsible for authorizing all official tax receipts. So the treasurer or its designate or their designate would sign the official tax receipts. And then for council, what you're responsible for is approving any donations that would be over $10,000, complying with the rules and requirements in the policy, and just in general, exercising integrity and good judgment when receiving donations on behalf of the township. So with that said, it's a quick run through of the update to the donation policy. If there's any questions, I think the overall message is that we're really guided by the CRA regulations and how we issue official tax receipts. And so we're just making sure we're adhering to those CRA guidelines going forward.
And before I go to council, I've got a couple just questions for clarity or just to confirm my understanding of this. The first one of no flow through was the term, I believe the term you used. By example of that, if someone wanted to make a donation to, say, a Lions Club, which is not a charitable organization, as in it does not give receipts, it is a not-for-profit. If they then gave that donation to us so that we could give it to the Lions Club, that would be one of those cases of no, we cannot issue a tax receipt for that. We cannot receive that donation. Is that a fair example?
Yeah, that's a fair example. Exactly. Yes.
Okay. The second one I wanted to identify is we have on occasion been in receipt, say, our fire department received donations from a corporate entity to provide specific equipment at times. I don't know if those were equipment donations or cash donations, but I know that some of them have been very significant and very beneficial to the municipality. Is that the nature of a donation that you're thinking of here?
Yeah, so if somebody donated a piece of equipment to us, I would imagine it'd be pretty easy to determine the fair market value of that. And if that person so wished, we could issue a donation receipt for the fair market value of such equipment. I can say, for example, I know in the past with the fire department, we have received donations of old automobiles, for example, to use for training purposes at the fire training center. And we have issued receipts for the fair value of basically scrapping a car, for example, as a reasonable amount.
Fair enough. Excellent examples. Okay, thank you. Council, do you have any questions with regard to this policy? No questions? I think we're all pretty clear. Okay. Oh, Councillor Townend, go ahead.
Yeah, through you, your worship, to the deputy treasurer. So, I mean, I understand, you know, that the policy is based on, you know, the careful adherence that we have to the CRA guidelines. Does the deputy treasurer envision any changes in federal legislation that would allow for, and I'm coming back to the mayor's question about flow of cash. The deputy treasurer will know from previous discussions with me that, you know, this is certainly an issue that has been raised on the island a number of times, that there are a lot of organizations on the island that don't have official not-for-profit status, but obviously contribute something meaningful to the community. And so, you know, it has been proposed in particular by the Amherst Island Community Alliance to have some means of being able to you know, funnel that through the township, which I accept cannot be done given the explanation that's been given. But are there, you know, are there foreseeable avenues in the future that would allow that?
Through you, your worship. Yeah, I think the previous discussions, you know, prior to tonight, I looked back, and I think it was back in the summer of 2020. I believe a resident from the island came forward, and a report went at that time, and there were three sort of alternatives provided for it at that time. For situations like that, and this might sound convoluted now because I talked about sponsorships not being eligible for, but there is a way that it's basically a sponsorship agreement that they could enter into sort of with the township, in the sense that it's a very specific sponsorship agreement for them to provide some kind of activity that aligns, I guess, with the township. But it basically allows for the township to maintain that level of control. So ultimately, they may be doing something on behalf of the township. Ultimately, we're still maintaining that level of control of, you know, paying the bills, making the decisions, even though, like, it's a very detailed description, or sponsorship agreement is what we call it. The other things were there were some options where, like, if we wanted some other areas, people might be familiar with, there are charitable foundations that have been set up by municipalities where you appoint a board of directors to essentially run these charitable foundations, but it can be quite intensive from a staffing point of view and administrative point of view. So I believe there is one that's run through the county, similar to that. But those would be probably the best options. In terms of changing CRA policy, I'm not aware of any. I haven't seen anything, but saying that, I've kind of left the public accounting game, so I'm not quite as up to date unless something comes down the pipe in that respect. But I've not seen anything.
Okay, Councillor Townend. Okay, with that, actually, Mr. Renier, if I could get you to stop sharing, we can see each other a little better.
Sure. Oh, sorry. Oh.
And it'll come to council. Is there any questions or comments with regard to the policies that Mr. Renier was just speaking of? Seeing none, no further comments. Mr. Renier, did you also have comments with regard to the water leak forgiveness adjustment?
Oh yes, I have more slides, your worship.
Okay.
I can go back to sharing my screen.
Let's go back. Okay.
Just a few more slides. I won't keep you too much longer. So the next is, this is a new policy. So this policy was actually requested from council many years ago. And we're finally here to bring it. So it's a water leak forgiveness adjustment policy. So here's this is the policy statement. So So basically, the adjustment policy, it provides metered single-family unit water supply customers. It's an opportunity to request financial assistance in the form of a credit for an abnormally high and unintentional water bill charge resulting from undetected leaks or other undetermined causes in their plumbing systems, provided that such a leak has been repaired. So essentially, the idea of the policy is that someone gets hit with a extremely high water bill, something happened in their plumbing, which is their responsibility. The township recognizes that can be a considerable financial hardship for many people. So this policy is to help address that. And the other part of this is to delegate some of this to township staff within the policy so that these residents homeowners don't always have to come before council to make such a request. So the scope of this policy, it applies to single family unit water supply customers in Loyalist Township. And essentially what that means is it applies to homeowners, residential water and wastewater residents. Commercial, industrial, and institutional water customers, as they identified under the assessment property classification, are not eligible under this policy. And we did want to just make sure it's clear that tenant customers of single family units are eligible, provided they meet all the other requirements. So if a tenant is renting a property and they are paying the water bill, depending on their tenant agreement, they would be eligible for this as well. So the next, I think 3 slides just kind of really go through all the different eligibility requirements to be considered for a water bill adjustment. So I'm just going to highlight a few. So for one, and then afterwards, I am just going to kind of walk through a sample or an example of how we would calculate the credit. So to start with, the customer's water billing account must be in good standing with the township. And there is the limit of 1 forgiveness adjustment applied as a credit to each qualifying utilities account. So it is a one-time credit. Now, based on this, we're doing it based on utilities accounts. So if somebody were to sell their somebody were to get the credit, sell their property 10 years later, the new homeowner would be eligible under this as well. We're not limiting it per residential address. And then some other points here, like the premise was not vacant or unattended during the period. We have put a limit on there that the customer must comply and submit a water bill adjustment request within 90 days of receiving notice of increased water usage. The receiving notice of increased water usage would typically come in the form of them receiving their bill in all likelihood. So this isn't a thing where you can get a large water bill and come back a year later, or a year and a half. Like does need to be some timeliness to it. And customers must make a reasonable effort to locate the leak and complete repairs within 60 calendar days of getting that notification. So a big part of this is that if we are going to issue an adjustment for an unplanned leak or something of that nature, the resident or the customer does need to make an effort to fix the leak, because we don't want this to be a reoccurring issue. If they haven't fixed the leak, they're going to keep having high water bills. So they really do need to demonstrate that they've fixed the leak. And which speaks to the next point, is that customers shall retain any receipts for the repairs and provide a copy of to the township, which would be part of the application process. The high water bill cannot be the result of a catch-up bill where an actual meter reading was obtained. So what that means is sometimes we use estimates if somebody has a broken water meter, especially now where we've been waiting to get out and put the new water meters in during the pandemic. So a lot of times if we use estimates for a few billing periods, then we get a new meter or get the meter out there, and it's a bit of a catch up because they've actually taken an actual reading now. Maybe the estimate was low, but that's not a reason for a high water bill adjustment. We would use the rates from the bill that the credit is being requested for. So that's just to address potential timing, that if your high water bill was in December at one rate, and let's say the rates went up in January, we're not going to go back and give the credit at the new potentially higher rates in the new year. It would be at the rates at the time of the bill. It's also important to note that the adjustment, it only applies to the volumetric charges. So it's just the consumption charges. It does not apply to the fixed fees, as they are fixed fees and apply on every bill. And customer must be able to explain the increased water usage. So basically what that means is they need to identify that something happened in their system that caused this water leak, and they've addressed it and fixed it. So just some of the details is, in calculating it, is that the consumption must exceed 2 times their average bi-monthly consumption for the previous year and be greater than 50 cubic meters on the bill. So basically, we go back and look at what their average consumption was, look at their high water bill, and figure out that difference. And the increased water usage, so these are some exemptions. It can't be due to filling a pool or a spa, irrigation systems, can't be vandalism, construction damage, things like watering your car, things of those natures. These are really meant for one-time exceptional cases. Then there's, again, no adjustments available when the leak is caused by a third party whom the cost may be recovered from. And it's also important to note that the maximum total credit would be $2,000. We've set a max limit. We, in practicality, would never expect it to really get that high. You'd have to have a pretty substantial bill. In my time, I haven't seen one like that would result in a credit like that. Again, just the roles and responsibilities. So again, the treasurer or their designate is here to develop and update this policy as necessary and bring any changes to council, just to ensure that the principles and requirements contained in the policy are applied consistently, and be delegated the authority to authorize forgiveness of water billing charges under the terms. So really, this is authorizing the treasurer or their designate to use this policy to issue credits. And then council, your main thing would be to consider any application forgiveness of water billing not covered under the terms of this policy. So that would also apply in event if someone applied under this policy and was denied the adjustment policy by the treasurer for whatever reason, they do still have the recourse to appeal, which in theory would be to come before council and request an adjustment, which is the recourse, which is the only recourse anybody has right now. Because staff is not delegated to issue these sort of things. So with that, I just provided a pretty basic example of how we would calculate the adjustment forgiveness amount. So for example, the customer gets a water bill with a consumption of 100 cubic meters on it. So you can see there with that bill, their volumetric charges are $497. We go back and look over the previous 12 years, and normally, on average, they only have about 25 cubic meters of consumption every month. So 124. So we would look at that. The difference of that 75 cubic meters, apply that to the rates, is $372. We give a credit for 50% of that. So in this situation here, that customer would receive a one-time credit of $186 after successfully putting in the application and being approved. So that's kind of how the policy works on a pretty simple level. And yeah, if there's any questions, I'm here to answer. Would you like me to stop sharing my screen, Mr. Mayor?
Actually, I find this this page to be quite handy. Council, do you want me to leave it up or do you want me to have them take it down? I'm seeing nods. Not sure what that means.
Nods for up or down?
I think we'll take it down for now.
Okay.
We may ask you to put it back up. Okay. Council, any questions with regard to that particular policy development? Okay, I'll kick things off. I can think of at least 2 examples in recent times that I think would likely not fall under these circumstances. One was a large community organization that owns property in Odessa that had a significant water event that they never did fully identify. And am I right in saying that A, because they're an organization, and B, because they weren't able to identify the loss cause, or the cause of the loss of water, then they would not be eligible under this particular policy?
Yes, Your Honor, that's correct. So for that organization, I believe I know the one you're speaking of, the recourse they actually took by coming to council would be still the recourse even with this policy.
The other one I'm thinking of, there was a relatively new home adjacent to a lot that was being developed, and the assumption, and again, it was only ever an assumption, that the construction crew next door tapped into their outdoor tap and siphoned off some water for that. That type of thing, again, under this policy would not be eligible, because if that's the assumption, A, they couldn't identify another source of the loss, so no repair bill that could be presented. And B, there would be potentially a third party that would be, liable for that. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, that'd be my understanding. And I don't know if I'd call that theft, but theft's also under here. That's what we mean by, I'm not saying in that case, but if somebody's tapping into your water line and using your water, that's not eligible for this policy.
Okay. And as I just wanted to get that clear. Council, how are we feeling about this direction? Anybody want to jump in? No, everybody's comfortable with this? Okay. Looks like no questions. You explained it very well, obviously. So we have two basic policies that the recommendation is that the policies with any amendments be included on a future agenda for council consideration. So they presented the ideas. Now they'll go back and do the actual work to draft the bylaw or the policy statements and bring that before council. Anyone wish to make a motion with regards to this? I'll go to Councillor Townend.
I move to receive the report and adopt recommendation number 1.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gordon, thank you. Any comments from the mover? Seconder? Anyone else? I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Motion is carried. Thank you very much. And thank you. I think that's it for Mr. Dickey and Mr. Renier. So we move forward to item 5.3 and Ms. Merritt. We have the Amherst West Secondary Plan land use comments before us. Ms. Merritt.
Through you, Your Worship. So we have a presentation tonight. Actually, Mr. Winnicky, our Manager of Development Services, and Ms. Nadia DeSanti from the consulting firm WSP will provide a progress update for you tonight. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, you should be able to see the presentation.
Council, can we see that? I'm seeing nods. Go ahead.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you, MJ. Through you, Your Worship, good evening, members of council. Pleased to be here tonight to provide you with a brief update on the status of the Amherst View West Secondary Plan. With me as well, as mentioned, is Nadia DeSanti, who's the project team lead from the WSP side of the project team. The team has been managing the development of a whole host of background studies and development since last summer. Many of these technical studies, but not all, have been completed, and those that are being put up on our secondary plan website, which you can browse at your leisure. More will be coming in the coming weeks, so please stay tuned and keep checking our website. We won't be going into any great detail on those background reports this evening, but if you're interested in knowing more about them, then I urge you to, again, go on our webpage where there's a video of the open house that we held a few weeks ago, where we had much more detail on those reports. So the key objective here today is to obtain your feedback on the 3 land use concepts or alternative land use concepts, and then feed this into the analysis that we're going to be undergoing in the next couple of weeks. And so that we can come up with a recommended land use option. And let me stress, at this point, the project team has not determined which one of the 3 options it prefers. So on the screen right now is today's agenda. We are, of course, in item 1, which is introductions and background information. What will follow is a presentation by Nadia, which includes an overview of where we are in the development of the secondary plan, an overview of the various background studies that have been done or in the process of being developed, and then a quick review of the 3 actual land use concepts that are under consideration. And then we're going to provide a summary of how these three concepts are being evaluated by the project team. Then we'll follow with question and answers and feedback from yourselves, and then discuss next steps. Any questions before we proceed?
Council, any questions? No? Please go ahead.
All right. Well, let's begin with a brief recap of the lands that are subject to the secondary plan. So Amherst View West is approximately 144 hectares in size, or 346 acres. It's bounded by Taylor Kidd Boulevard, or County Road 23 to the north, Bath Road, Highway 33 to the south, Parrots Bay Conservation Area to the west, and County Road 6 and the existing built-up area in Amherst View to the east. There are some, I would point out, existing residential properties currently within this planning area. Next slide, please. These are the declared and council endorsed objectives for the secondary plan project. One is to identify the future needs and priorities for the community of Amherst View West to the year 2046, including housing types, urban design, community amenities, protection of the natural environment, stormwater and servicing, transportation, and that includes active transportation as well. To prepare a land use plan implementing the policies of the official plan of Amherst View West, the secondary plan will be implemented through an official plan amendment as well as a zoning bylaw amendment. And we also will be preparing urban design guidelines to guide the built form of the area to ensure compatibility in a new and developing community. Parallel to this, we have been laying the groundwork for satisfying a municipal class environmental assessment process. The MCEA will be integrated with the secondary plan to address land use, servicing, transportation, and environmental considerations. But the key milestone we are at right now is the release of these three land use concepts that we feel could satisfy the objectives of the project. We want to hear your feedback on these three alternatives, feed this into the analysis, so in the coming weeks we can come up with a recommended land use option. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Nadia, and she will describe the steps and analysis taken in preparation for these three options. So over to you, Nadia.
Thank you, Bowden. Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. My name is Nadia DeSanti. I am a registered professional planner, and I am the project manager for the Amherst View West secondary plan and environmental assessment process. So just to piggyback on what Bowden mentioned, we are doing an integrated planning and EA process. So the top part of this diagram is a secondary plan process, and the municipal class EA process is at the bottom. And we are currently wrapping up phase 3, which is the developing the 3 land use options. We've developed evaluation criteria. We've had technical advisory committee and coordination committee meetings. We did have our public open house on March 10th. And so we will continue to meet with the public. So phase 2 is in the middle of this diagram, and that is ongoing throughout the project. And we will be moving into phase 4 with more evaluation with the preferred land use plan, a draft secondary plan document, a draft official plan amendment, draft zoning bylaw amendment, and following these with additional meetings, including another statutory public meeting. So there's still quite a bit of work to do, but I'm happy to get into some more of the presentation content. So the next slide, please. So in terms of public engagement, we've had a virtual visioning workshop last summer. We do have a coordinating committee, technical advisory committee. We've had many community meetings with developers and landowners. We gave a presentation to the Kingston Home Builders Association as well. So lots of interest in this area. And we've had council meetings and updates. So lots of various outreach. We do have a project website on the township's website, and we do update that, including the frequently asked questions, or the FAQs. We have also reached out to the various Indigenous communities, as well as the Lennox and Addington County. So lots of different groups, and we'll continue to meet with these throughout the project duration. Next slide, please. As Bowden mentioned, we've done quite a bit of work. There's still some reports that are in draft form that are with Township for review. However, many of these reports are on the Township website. We are currently finishing up the traffic count analysis that our team is working on. And there are some reports, as I mentioned, that are with Township review, but the project website does have many of these reports, including the growth management report, the natural heritage and constraints report, the phase 1 environmental site assessment, the archaeological overview, cultural heritage resource assessment. So there's quite a few there that are available. In addition, we are working on a background review report. So basically it will summarize the findings of all of these more technical reports in one document. So we just received Township comments on that. So we're just making those edits. So that will be also available and posted on the Township website. Next slide, please. So one of the key reports that is on the Township's website is a natural heritage report that my colleagues had prepared. And basically their findings resulted in 4 constraint areas from a natural heritage. So natural heritage includes provincially significant wetlands, significant woodlands, valley lands, and those are high constraint. And those are shown by the red color. And then moderate to high constraint are potential wildlife linkages. So looking at corridors, not just pockets or polygons, but those corridors for habitat to move through. So those are shown as the colors on my screen are a bit small, but those are the next sort of highest level of environmental constraint. And then we have moderate constraint and minimal constraint. And so these areas have been considered in the preparation of the 3 draft land use options. Next slide, please. From the cultural heritage perspective, so there is a cultural heritage resources report, and that was recently approved by the sites to be considered to be put on the municipal register of properties of cultural heritage value or interest was approved by council. And the 3 addresses are listed here and illustrated here. We have undertaken a more detailed cultural heritage inventory report for property B for 4661 Bath Road. And our colleagues and the township have met with the owners of the property and had ongoing discussions. So they were quite participatory and willing to communicate and discuss further. So these areas have also been shown as a cultural heritage potential on the land use options. Next slide, please. In terms of the guiding objectives, so just recognizing that Amherst v. West is in a settlement area in the township's official plan. So settlement areas are areas under the 2020 provincial policy statement where future growth and development should occur. And in this particular area, looking at urban development moving westerly from the existing community of Amherst View. And we are looking at land uses for residential, commercial. We want to make sure that they are planned in an orderly fashion and in an efficient manner. Looking at strengthening Amherst View's commercial base and opportunities for new amenities and economic development in Amherst View West. Next slide. In addition, we want to ensure that we're respecting the existing character of Amherst View West and the preservation and protection of provincially significant natural features and other important natural features and cultural heritage resources. And from a transportation perspective, we want to make sure that this area is well connected to the rest of Amherst View and the township. And so our plans will be looking at both a road network, but also an active transportation network. And as Bowden mentioned, we will have a separate urban design standards document that will help to visualize, help to describe items such as built form, open space, site sustainability, climate change resiliency, and that will be used to help guide the future development in the secondary plan area. And the secondary plan and how that is implemented through the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment, but also it will provide direction for future plans of subdivision, future site plans. It will include a phasing schedule and triggers for moving on to the next phase, as well as flexibility for the redesignation of the potential future development areas, which I will highlight in the land use options. Next slide, please. So based on a number of items, these are the assumptions that we used. So further to the Hempson study that was done for the township's official plan, we were in correspondence with them to really help extrapolate the projections for this specific area. And so we're assuming a 25-year planning horizon, so 2046, with a population growth anticipated of approximately 2,420 people. And that translates into approximately 1,000 residential units. And that translates into a land area of 20.47 net hectares. From an employment perspective, we have considered a minimum of 1.3 net hectares of commercial employment land. And the commercial employment land is not your industrial type of land uses. Those will be and continue to be directed to the business park, which is north of the study area. These commercial employment land uses are retail, cafes, personal service type of businesses, law offices, those sorts of things. There was a strong community desire from the visioning session last summer that really was supportive of having these types of employment and commercial type uses in this area. So we've accounted for that. Based on the number of population projected, we would need approximately 6.05 hectares of parkland. So that would be in various typologies. And we, with the township, have reached out to the school boards, and only one school board indicated a need for a 2-hectare school block in this area. So we've shown that. And we've also included the planned roadworks, which many of you probably are fully aware that the county is planning to undertake roundabout design at County Road 6 and Taylor Kidd Boulevard, as well as roadworks 200 meters south of that intersection. Next slide, please. Just a little bit more finer grain of the population and the housing types. So based on the township's official plan and the requirement for providing different housing in different densities, this is a table illustrating those 1,000 units and applying the township official plan densities. So we're looking at low density of about 550 units, which would be like single detached, semis. Medium density would be, townhouses, including singles and semis, but a little bit higher density. And then the highest density would be in the form of an apartment building, for example. And just to note that I'm referring to net hectare because that is the developable area. So gross hectares would be higher than that, but we always apply a gross down factor. 25% is an industry standard, and that accounts for infrastructure, parks, stormwater management, ponds, that sort of thing. So that's a more detailed breakdown. And again, these numbers are also in the draft growth management report that's on the township's website. Next slide, please. So in terms of the land use options, in all three options, the proposed land use designations are really on the eastern part of the study area. The balance of the land, save and except for the existing residential lands that are shown in white, are shown in gray as potential future development area. And the reason for that is based on the population projections, which translates into the 1,000 residential units, and the land area that's required to meet that, we actually don't need all of that land at this time for the population. So all three options have the land area in this general location. The township owns most of the lands in the northeast quadrant. We're showing 2 stormwater management ponds in blue. And so just at a high level, we have, the collector road kind of as an extension from Amherst Drive to the west, connecting to County Road 23 and then down to Kildare Avenue. The low-rise residential is, or low-density residential is in yellow. The orange is medium-density residential, and the red is the high-density. In this option, we're showing commercial in the northeast section. We're showing the school block, which is shown in blue, is institutional, just sort of in that curve. And then we have those 3 cultural heritage properties shown as a hatched. And of course, the parkland is shown in green. And in this option, the collector road would be crossing Lost Creek. And I mean, that's a concern that, we need to look at when we're evaluating the alternatives. And so that is sort of the layout for this option. And if we could go to the next option, please. This one, slight difference in that there is no connection to the collector roads are not connecting to County Road 23 to the north. So kind of connecting through sort of a little bit more central, but obviously Amherst Drive, that intersection, we're also showing on all 3 concepts with a black star as a gateway. So kind of, this is the new community of Amherst View West. This is gateway, kind of that entrance into the new community. And so sort of shifting some of the land uses a bit further south and different arrangement. Again, showing the commercial block off of County Road 6. Again, from a visibility access, retailers and commercial uses like that visibility, obviously, for their customers and access. So sort of shifting that around. And then the next option, also, again, just a different arrangement. I also want to identify that all 3 options show some pedestrian trails conceptually, and those have been taken from the township's official plan schedule as well. So we've shown that, again, they're conceptual in nature, no alignment has been confirmed. And I think that's all I want to say on this one. So the next slide, please. In terms of phasing, so we're proposing 3 phases. And again, this is part of the discussion that we'd like to have with council and we'll continue to have with the township and the community. But we're looking at 3 phases. The first phase being 0 to 10 years of approximately 490 dwelling units, and that would include the expansion of Amherst Drive to the west, improvements to County Road 6 and the Amherst Drive intersection, development along the County Road 6 corridor, and implementation of the stormwater management facilities. The next phase, approximately 11 to 15 years with another 220 dwelling units. Again, continuing the expansion of the road network to the south and the trails and the stormwater management facilities. And phase 3 is 16 to 20 plus years with the remaining 260 dwelling units. What I would like to say on this is that the secondary plan will have policies and a phasing schedule, and there will be triggers that will help to guide, okay, when are we going into the next phase? And so the phasing is very much tied to servicing. And as you know, the township is updating and working on their infrastructure master plan, which will include the whole area. But there's no sort of check mark that says, oh, it's 10 years. Now we go to the next phase. It's also market driven. And if things happen and continue to have the growth that the township has been seeing, the secondary plan will be flexible in that, if that first phase is only 8 years, well, that's only 8 years. But again, the policies are a guide. It's not a direct thou shall. So I just want to make sure that council is aware of that. Next phase. Next slide, please. So I know that we have 30 minutes, so I guess we can open the floor back to your worship and the council. If there are any questions, any items or comments that anyone wants to raise, we're happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Santi. Council, do you want the screen, the sharing screen up or down at this time? I'm seeing nods of kind of shaking heads of either way. Let's stop sharing for the moment, and we can see each other and ask our questions. And if we have to pop it back in, we can do so. Okay. I know that this has generated a lot of conversation in a number of places, so I'm assuming that it will generate some conversation here as well. Who would like to start? Comments or questions with regard to the materials presented? Okay. Oh, Councillor Gordon, go ahead.
Sorry, just on the one proposal there with regards to taking, or I guess initially you're proposing a road that would join not County Road 6, but Taylor Kidd, I call it. But and then you take that away, and then with that many units in there, is there concern for too much traffic bottled up inside without, we get a lot of flack in Amherst now for when we opened the road up. We were always going to do it, but it wasn't really proposed to a lot of the people that bought their homes. But when Kildare came on to County Road 6, certainly caused a lot more traffic. However, that sometimes is necessary. So I'm just wondering, heading over to Taylor Kidd, in my opinion, would probably almost be necessary with that many more people. And if we have the growth that we have now, everybody leaving all at once to go into work, and that same thing coming back. So just a thought on that particular road there.
Anyone wish to handle that one?
Oh, no, it's a fair comment, and I think as Nadia mentioned, we're still finalizing the traffic study. That's one of the outstanding ones right now. So we'll have to, using that data, look at that a little closer for sure, and that'll be worked into the evaluation of the three options.
Okay.
If I could follow up on that, Councillor Gordon, just for a moment, and I'll come back to you. You had mentioned, Nadia, you had mentioned the idea that it was a big challenge to put that road across the waterway. We already have a road that does cross the waterway, that being Parrots Bay Lane. Was there consideration of, instead of coming down on, more to the middle or towards the east, coming down more towards the west and connecting up to Parrots Bay Lane? Would the bridge there, the culvert really that's there, have to be rebuilt in order to maintain that type of traffic? What was the considerations around that laneway?
Thank you. Through you, your worship. So just to clarify, the connection over Lost Creek, not necessarily a challenge, but just more of there is, some higher natural environment areas there. So just more from that part of the evaluation, just wanted to highlight one of the differences. So I'm going to take this question back to our my traffic transportation colleague about connecting down to Parrots Bay Lane. I think one of the points is, really trying to keep the infrastructure, including the roadway, sort of centered around the area that we need, sort of the eastern part of the study area. In terms of the, I will ask him, and I can provide feedback back to the township that perhaps Bowden can circulate, but I don't know the answer to all of that. I'm not sure the condition there, but again, we were trying to sort of keep the road network contained within the area that we actually need for future development.
Just two very quick comments on that. First of all, as much as I do want the answer to the question I just posed, I can tell you that the residents on the southern end of that would not be very appreciative of even me asking the question, certainly. Second to that, the question of, are we only looking at that eastern portion along County Road 6 is likely to be a big topic here. Anyway, going back, Councillor Gordon.
Well, good.
Did you have more?
Nope, I'm good, thanks.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Other questions or comments? I'll start with the deputy and then go to Councillor Budrick.
I have a question and a comment, and I'm bringing it up now because it's kind of directly related to what was just discussed. I understand Councillor Gordon's concern with all the traffic going out to County Road 6 and potential problems there. I guess just going back to my background, that road going across where it's shown there, I think could be a real challenge. It's a wide spot in the wetlands. It would have a large amount of impact and a lot of negative impact. So the mitigation would have to be, I'm assuming, would be fairly substantial. So when you bring those all together, the benefit of that extra road where it's showing could be very quickly offset by the amount of work and expense that would be involved to put it there. So, and I know that the planning sections are, I'm sure, are already well aware of all that. So I'm more saying it for some of the public that may be listening, but I would, and then taking it the next step further, sort of along the lines of what the mayor said, there's other opportunities when the expansion gets to that point where we could bring it further in on Taylor Kidd and bring it down to a narrower section, not necessarily into the existing lane, but to the west of it, or sorry, to the east of it, and be able to, if we wanted to swing a road around and have a connection to Taylor Kidd, there's future options that may be more viable than going where it's shown now. So between the environmental concern, the cost of construction, and the ongoing cost of maintenance, that where it's shown right now, I think there could be very well justification for it not being routed that way. The downside to it is, in that example, that also opens up a little more area for development. If I'm looking at it correctly, between that street and the creek, there is an area that is potentially able to be developed. I guess when it comes down to actually finalizing the plans, that may still be able to be developed with other streets, other side streets, and not right off the arterial roads. So that area may not be lost for development, even if that road is eliminated.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Buderick?
So let me get this straight. It's a 25-year plan and we're building 3 roads. That's more of a question, but there's a longer comment coming. And there's one person on council that can talk to this even better than I can. But I remember 40 years ago living on Kildare, right near Fairfield Elementary School. And I remember a plan coming out for the balance of the roadways being built to encompass from south of Amherst Drive, north of Bath Road, all the way to County Road 6. Is that something we've thought about doing? Because we won't understand cost sharing for roads, for underground infrastructure, to deal with many different landowners in there. I was just curious if a larger picture has been thought about instead of just this, because I asked 2 different people skin in the game regarding this evening, and I got 2 essays back from each of them, and there's a lot of concern about it, and I was just curious if we thought of a bigger plan, because obviously we're running off of 2018 data for growth. It's skewed right now. Will it stay where it is? Who knows? But builders are throwing houses up as quick as they can. I'm just curious if we have a plan for filling the whole property potentially, as well as an option for us to consider.
Well, I can take a stab at it, and Nadia can jump in. But yeah, this is picking up on what Nadia said about structuring the secondary plan so that, first of all the infrastructure will be designed to accommodate that future development zone. Even though currently the data, the hard data that we're working with, including the census numbers that just came out, don't necessarily suggest that we need to do that. But that may happen. Like a couple of years from now, we may see a continuing explosion of growth in Eastern Ontario, and we may have to bring those lands on sooner. So the policies, the secondary plan will be set up with that ability to do that. So that's, and then we're also talking about policies on how the rest of those lands get planned, because we don't know at which point, like 15 years down the road, we might need another school, so we can't really predict what land use would be. We've predicted it what it should be here, but down the road we don't know what the needs will be for things like that. So we can't really put down land use concepts for those future areas. That has to be done at another stage down the road, and we will have policies to enable that to be done. So I don't know if Nadia, you have anything to add to that?
Yes, thank you, through you, your worship. That's just to add to what Bowden has mentioned. In terms of cost sharing, these are discussions that the township has to have for sure. And there are definitely different ways of implementing that. And those are items that the township will have to have discussions on. We're going to have discussions with the landowners in the area, and those definitely are part of the project. And the cost sharing arrangement, whatever that is, will also be described in the secondary plan. So that whole financial component has to be put in there, and those discussions still need to be had, but they are on the radar. And in terms of again, the township is guided by the 2020 provincial policy statement, and it requires a 25-year planning horizon and a 15-year supply of designated residential land. And so over, showing an over designations on lands is not common practice. Many secondary plans will have a future development area with policies. And as Bowden mentioned, we don't know what the population will be and what other kinds of land uses, including perhaps community centers or municipal facilities. And those are all dictated as well by population, schools, maybe other types of housing types that perhaps we haven't seen yet. So the policies will be flexible in that, and will describe how those future development areas can come on board. Wanted to just augment there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buderick. Okay. Councillor Gordon, go ahead.
Hi, this is more of a comment, I guess, than it is a question, but I've traveled a lot, and we're right across Canada, and many of us have, and I cannot think of another community anywhere I've traveled in Canada and the States even, where there's this many people, 10, 11, 12,000, and now possibly another 2 or 3, without some kind of a main street. And I don't know if it's old fashioned to plan a main street anymore. It was never planned in Amherst. So consequently, we have a couple of strip malls here and there. And, from the business community, I mean, it would be perhaps better if we had, one busy street for them, so to speak, like in Napanee or Gananoque, where, the restaurants and stores are all across from one another, an actual main street. But I don't know, maybe that just doesn't fit in just an observation. So Rick, you've been here a lot, I've been here 30 years, but I get asked that all the, where's the main street? Well, there isn't one. So, but.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. And I will add my comments. This is committee of the whole, no, Amherst View was built as a bedroom community 50 plus years ago, and it wasn't envisioned to have a main street. And it's one of the things that are certainly lacking within the community. And to that end, some of my comments and questions with regard to this, obviously there is some very optimistic view that both amongst this council and amongst the development community and some of the residents, that the growth is going to outstrip what is currently projected based on the standards from across the country, because we have had a history of outstripping some of that growth pattern, and we're seeing even more and more pressure on it. When I look at that first 10 years in your plan, suggesting that it's 490 homes, I believe it was in the first 10 years. That says adding 50 homes per year to Amherst View, which definitely seems quite shy to me. I understand that that's part of the growth plan, but again, if I were a betting man, I would bet on higher. And I appreciate Bowden's comments that the next phases can be triggered fairly quickly within this process. Mm-hmm. I'm also very appreciative of the fact that the statements that were made saying that the whole property infrastructure, some of the kind of the general designations for the whole property are being looked at as part of this study, so that the larger piece can be addressed. It's very important. The question, or the, I think that there is a need, and this is a comment from me personally, a need for a greater percentage of higher density. You've got 4% marked as the high density, and that may be reflective of what we currently have, but what we currently have is simply not adequate, and we're very aware of it. You've got, I believe it's 1.3 hectares marked as commercial, and I forget what the percentage that was, but it is a small percentage, and again, it may well be reflective of what we currently have, but again, it's well known that what we currently have is not reflective. And this comes back to Councillor Gordon's comments that we have an opportunity here to fix the historic mistake and build a main street, that being the stretch of Kennedy Road 6 from Taylor Kidd down to Bath Road, and have a long strip of commercial right along there. Now, I realize that there are properties there that have, the owners have currently indicated that they have no intention of changing it, but that would be up to the property owners, certainly. No, but there is a need for high visibility commercial in our region, most definitely. What that need is may be evaluated by a planning process, but it can also be a gut reaction by this council. And this council, and actually here's where my question is. Can this council direct that we be more ambitious, more aggressive, to have higher percentages for the high density, for the commercial, et cetera, as we go through this, because this is our projecting document. So as much as I understand that the planners may not necessarily agree, or maybe more conservative than what I'm suggesting, but it is within the realm of this council to make a decision to be more aggressive, is it not? Anyone? Bowden's nodding.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is this is exactly the kind of feedback we're trying to get from council, so we can take it back and look at that, what the implications are.
So if we just, again, I'm horrible with numbers, but I saw 4% for high density. If we said 10%, what would that mean? If we saw 1.3 hectares for commercial, if we said, let's make it 3 hectares for commercial. Again, I'm making up a number there. I don't know what that impact is, but I think from the input that I've had from the people talking about this property, I think that's more in the line of what the general public is looking for. That higher volume commercial and higher availability of high density. I have one fairly weird specific question, if I can throw it in there, right? I note in all 3 of your diagrams, you've got a blue wastewater facility block, very close, in one case, very close to the corner of Taylor Kidd and Kennedy Road 6, right in the middle of where I would perceive to be wetland, swamp, whatever you want to call it. And another one about 2/3 of the way down towards Bath Road, immediately adjacent Kennedy Road 6, on what appears to be fairly high, dry, flat, basically a limestone shelf. So I'm assuming that those facilities are not specific to the geography. And my question would be, why would we put them into what would be kind of obvious prime commercial, high visibility locations?
Oh, I see.
I'm wondering if there's a justification for that location specifically for those 2 blocks.
Yeah, so we don't have our WSP engineer on the line, and I don't think Jenna is here, who's also on our project team. They were more involved in some of this, some of these discussions.
Madam Clerk? Sorry.
Jenna's just coming over here now. She is on from another. So.
Oh, okay. So she would be the best position to answer that question.
Excellent. Thank you. Did you hear my question, Ms. Campbell?
I believe I heard most of it, Your Worship, yes.
Okay.
So I think I can answer that. I hope I heard most of it. So in terms of the stormwater management facilities.
No, sorry, not the stormwater management facilities.
Okay, I did not hear it then. I apologize.
The stormwater management facilities are the cloud light blue shapes that are in the southwestern section and kind of diagonally running along Lost Creek. What I'm thinking of is specifically the darker blue blocks. In one case is immediately adjacent the light blue cloud piece, and in the other case is halfway down County Road 6, almost immediately adjacent to County Road 6. They're wastewater facilities, as I believe they're dubbed in those maps.
Your pumping stations, Jenna.
Okay. Sorry,
that's what I thought they were, and why would we put them there?
I apologize, Your Worship. I'm just trying to interpret what you're asking. Yes, so those are looking at again, they're looking at locations for sewage pumping stations. So again, dependent on the relief of the lands to some extent, in terms of sewage flows by gravity. So gravity, we need them to be at a low point. So sorry, the one that I'm looking at is not really where I expect to see it. I need to go. We'll have to answer. I'm really sorry. We'll have to get you that answer. It's a reasonable question. I don't have the answer to it though. I apologize.
And I guess the secondary piece to that question, if you can add it into the future answer, is I look at the Lakeview pumping station, and it is kind of tucked in behind in a park and not very obtrusive to the public, where both of these locations are prime high visibility locations. Just a secondary part to that question is, will we be able to hide them? I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, yeah, so just to answer your question, I think most definitely it depends on the size of them. It depends on the type of access that's needed. Some of the more recent pumping stations that we've constructed, depending on the size, can be, a couple of chambers in the ground with some control panels, but, most need a generator, most need, somewhere for people to do some work, that sort of thing. So they do need to be of adequate size to house all of those components. So can we hide them similar to something like Lakeview Park, where, they're there, but they're not taking up the entire area? Possibly. There are also rules about, setbacks and different things when you're constructing those sorts of facilities these days. So good feedback. We'll do our best to hide them.
I guess my last comment to that would be, if the city of Los Angeles can hide oil derricks inside buildings and underneath buildings, I'm sure we can find a way to hide a sewage pumping station.
Understood. Fair comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Has that generated any other thoughts from any other members? Questions, comments? Councillor Gordon, go ahead.
Yeah, I just actually wanted to follow up a little bit with that. I was just thinking about this with the business thing, but I think we've done a great job selling off the lots for the industrial park. As I understand, I think all the lots are sold. No?
There might be one left.
Oh, okay, one left. Well, I drove by that park for years and years where there was one or two buildings. So I think everybody involved has done a great job to help grow that park. The number one thing that I get approached on over and over and over are taxes. So that is just the most common comment, right? Our taxes. And I keep saying to people, well, one way you can help yourselves is shop local. And I said, the more businesses we get, that'll help offset your residential taxes. So I think moving forward with all this growth, I'd like to see us focus maybe a bit more on the idea that we don't want to continue Amherst on as it is with a strip mall here and a strip mall there, that we have to do something to make it more attractive. Gas prices are high enough, maybe people will stop driving in the Gardner's Road for everything, and maybe shop local, maybe a second grocery store out here, maybe a hardware store, maybe again, this size population. I mean, I know you go to Perth and Smith Falls and those places, they're quite a bit further away from a bigger center, but they have everything and anything. And we basically operate on just the essentials here. So, I mean, there's not a couple of hair salons, there's been some new restaurants, but same with Odessa. I mean, anything we can do to make businesses want to come to Loyalist Township. And I don't mean, yes, the big plants are great, but just the small shops, anything that will help, they contribute to the tax base. So I just would like to always have that in the back of your mind when you're planning stuff, to make something more attractive to any businesses that we could hope to lure out here. So into the bedroom community of Amherst, but so just wanted to follow up on that. Thanks.
Okay. Just a comment on that. I mean, through you, Your Worship, recently there has been interest in commercial development, not in the secondary plan area, but close to it, which I'm not allowed to speak about yet. But right. So there is interest in bringing commercial development to this area of Amherst.
Good, great. Thank you.
Other thoughts or comments? Deputy, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, I'm just going to not build on it, but something that the discussion when Councillor Budrick brought up his question, it triggered me to take another look at these plans that are provided here. I don't see where there's any road stubs for future development in the rest of the development area, potential development area. So I guess I think I've got a basic, I think I basically understand the fact that we're working on a 25-year plan. To go beyond that is a real crystal ball. And also, if we go beyond that and go too far into a plan, we could end up with obsolete information when it was needed. And, environmental assessments and everything would be obsolete and wouldn't meet the requirements of the day. But I guess it just kind of triggered me to re-ask the question again. Is it possible to not go down the path of the full plan, but a conceptual drawing of even a roadway, the roadways? And I guess it would build two things. One, we'd be sure to have access to County Road 6, and that it wouldn't be fully developed around these roads shown here. And the other is we could integrate the walking paths or the multi-use pathways a little better, because what I'm looking at right now is there is a potential that we would have to take those paths to make them into roads if we don't have the stubs ready to go out. So I guess it's sort of, there may be stubs, but they're not shown on these drawings with them being conceptual. But I guess that's where I'm looking at is it feasible, maybe not a part of this plan, but even finish this project so we know where we're going for 25 years. And then I guess it would be the future, the next council that would have to put into consideration, do we look at a future roadwork network conceptual drawing?
A great point. That's actually come up in some of the discussions we've been having with the local landowners to provide, just like with the trails, some sort of conceptual road network for the larger area. And so we've heard that, and I'll let Nadia speak to that a little bit more, but that is something that's being considered.
Thanks, Bowden, and through you, Your Worship. Yes, we can show, conceptual road alignments, and again, they would be conceptual, right? Because they would still need to go through a process. But as Bowden mentioned, we've heard some requests and comments from the landowners, and I think, we're happy to show that and at least sort of show where those connection points could be. So we can look at that and we can show that, and there would be wording in the secondary plan specific to that item that they are conceptual, but at least it would help to provide sort of where that connectivity would be, and again, showing that I think would help the township, but also the community.
Absolutely. I think Councillor Buderek earlier made a comment that one member of council would remember before I did, and I think he was referring to me. And the plan, what was called at the time Plan 1081, that goes back to the 80s, and had a rough streetscape diagram of the entire west side of Amherst View. And I mean, it was only 25 years ago that Amherst Drive connected to County Road 6, even though it was drawn in 2 decades before that. It is helpful to have those kind of long-term plans. And as much as I say that, Plan 1081 does not look like the streetscape we have today. It changed distinctly over those 40 years with the new developer coming in and the new size of houses and all of the new factors, whether it's new environmental standards, new streetscapes, do whatever. Yes, it changed. But having that diagram in the first place, just showing the idea that north of Amherst Drive would fill in, was eye-opening to a lot of people. And it helps with that long-term ambitiousness that I think this council's speaking to. I know the developers are speaking to. If you can see that the future that area will be filled in, it helps them start to say that, okay, we can start working on that. It's hard to work from a blank page. It's a lot easier to work from something that's already at least drafted. Mm-hmm. And again, it can be conceptual, so it doesn't have to be locked in stone. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, council. Oh, deputy, go ahead.
I just have a question and then just a couple comments.
Sure.
If I may continue. The question is, if I understand it correctly, are staff looking for council to choose the preferred option with the 3, or just pick out the points that they like in them?
Yeah. I think it's, through your worship, I think it's the latter. Okay. We're looking for critique.
Okay.
Not necessarily like a suggested recommendation on one of the options.
Okay. So in that case, I just have a couple options or a couple of things that I'd like to point out, positives and negatives. The last drawing, number 3, the one thing I noticed with it is, if I'm looking at it correctly, the majority of the park is in the far southwest corner, which potentially, looking at it from what we see today, that may be the last portion of the development to happen, which means that potentially that park may not be developed until the very end. And although a nice big chunk of land is nice to have for a park, there's also benefits to having smaller parks throughout, little parkettes for even the smaller children, and things like that. And also so that they could be developed as the community grows, there would be a park integrated within the concept. So that was one of that was the big point on that one. And then when we go to the middle one, I like the concept of the roads aren't just straight. They've got curves in them. They've got character. They've got natural speed calming measures built into them. And it also gives the appearance, the way it's drawn here, that it may actually allow a little better development too, to be able to build out where the road, dips down further south and comes around. Potentially in this one plan, we may have a little more land that's actually available for development. And it also does show, as I mentioned with the parks, it shows a few parks along the way that could be developed as the community grows. And then the first drawing, I've already commented on it with the road crossing the creek, and it does have curved, somewhat. Amherst Drive would be straight, which I think could be a traffic issue for ongoing speeding concerns. But I do like the middle one the best, where it just has a little more aesthetics to it as well as functionality.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Thank you very much.
Other comments and feedback? Councillor Gordon, go ahead.
This is just more or less for, actually, if anyone wants a copy, but it just so happens it's a timely thing that was out on my desk, but if you can see it, that's Amherst in 1962.
Oh, yeah.
So it's changed a bit. There's the, used to be the nunnery, I guess, or whatever, and that's your street, Rick. So I think the planning
The house I
department,
grew up in. No.
I'll get you copies. So there was that was all field back then, right? So pretty interesting. So I will get the planning department copies and they can have a look just for fun. I just wanted to throw that in there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Everywhere we live was once field. That's
or forest.
Other comments? I'm going to add one more of my own, and that being, and this is just a personal preference. I'll come back to Councillor Parks as well. I note in all three of them, you've got the blue kind of cloudy shaped stormwater drain areas that Ms. Campbell was referring to earlier. Specifically, the northern one running along the Lost Creek, there's the pink area of environmentally sensitive lands. Right? I'm wondering if we can incorporate parkland and trail and that water management all kind of within the same body, and if we can make multiple use out of similar tools, if you will. And that's just my thought, and I'll come back to Councillor Parks.
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree exactly with what you were saying with the waste water facilities. If there's an opportunity to move those, that's a fairly integral corner of the property, and I think it would be best suited for development of some other type, if that's possible. If we were able to move that, we could also possibly move the road to come out, depending upon the distance, to the corner of Taylor Kidd and County Road number 6. We might be able to bring the road out further on Taylor Kidd, or to the east of where it is now, and not have to go through the swamp area.
Thank you. Other comments? I know staff is taking down notes on all of this stuff.
We'll be watching the recording.
Absolutely. Okay, if there's no further comment at this time, again, this is a long process, and there will be lots of opportunity for feedback. We were noting earlier, there's lots of public consultations scheduled over the coming months. So I look forward to the continued conversation. At this time, the recommendation is to receive for information and provide feedback. I think we have provided feedback. Okay, can I get a motion to that effect? Deputy, so moved. Thank you. Can I get a seconder? Councillor Gordon, thank you. Okay. And I'm just realizing, have we lost Councillor Buderick? I think we have.
Yes, Your Worship, about 8 minutes ago, so I'm just trying to watch the screen to see if he comes back.
Okay. And we still have quorum, so I'll call it on this. I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you, and thank you all for the detailed discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We
Good
move
night.
forward. We only got a couple more here. Right. Regulation and license of transportation companies, rideshare. And actually, Mr. Silver, if you don't mind, noting that what I just realized a few moments ago that Councillor Buderick isn't here, I think, and again, begging council's discretion, I will move to item 5.5 first and wait to see if Councillor Buderick can come back in for the discussion with regard to 5.4, because he's been involved with that. Is that okay, Mr. Silver? Thank you. So Can we go to 5.5 then? Which would mean bringing in our Director Merritt.
Okay, so this is going to be another, thank you, Your Worship. There's another presentation here. This time, members of my team presenting will be Dave Thompson, Jenna Campbell, and Remy Masserani. So we can start. I'll share my screen. There you go.
We haven't seen Ramy in a while.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you all.
Welcome back.
Okay, you should be able to see my screen now. Presentation.
I can. Council, can we see it? I'm seeing nods.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I think, oh, Dave might be just coming in. Sorry.
Mr. Thompson.
Okay.
Yeah, can you see my camera, or should you be able to?
Can't see you, but we can hear you.
What's going on here? Sorry, here we go. There we are.
Okay. Yeah. Go for it, Dave.
Okay. Next slide, MJ, please. Here's the agenda for tonight. We're going to move fairly fast through all parts except for part 5, which is Ramy's going to give a pretty detailed discussion on water and wastewater planning for growth. And moving along, I know it's late, so I'm not going to dawdle here. We are going to have a couple planned question stops at the end of each section, and there'll be time for questions at the end. So we'll be stopping every now and then to do that. On a quick note, this is kind of good that it follows Amherst West secondary plan. Ms. Campbell sits on the technical committee of that project and his weekly bringing in up all the news to date. So the master plan a major part of the projects in the master plan will come right out of the Amherst West project once it's inked in and we can actually count the things. But we're very aware of what's going on, and since Nadia did such a good job explaining all the different phases and things she's doing, I'm going to go fairly fast through that. So meeting objectives tonight, we're going to give a brief overview of the status of the project. Ramy's going to give a discussion on the importance of the township's water and sewer wastewater treatment reserve capacity as it relates to the growth scenarios. And I'm going to provide a little bit of overview of some of the types of problems and opportunities that are being evaluated with the IMP. Next slide, please, MJ. I like this slide because it kind of brings everything together. There's a lot of acronyms we use. So right off the bat, I'm going to use IMP, Infrastructure Master Plan, quite a bit. You'll see MCA, that's the Municipal Class Environmental Assessment. That's a planning process approved by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks for use for municipal planning of water, sanitary, stormwater, and transportation works only. It doesn't apply to anything else. And for our study, we're focusing on some of the drivers: growth primarily, remedial, regulatory, technological change, and climate change. And next slide, please, MJ. So similar to Nadia's thing, phase 1 and phase 2, we have pretty well completed phase 1. And that's basically identifying problems and opportunities. I'll come back to that in a little while. And engagement. So, you know, part of it is working with our operations and planning staff. We've reached out to developers. We haven't heard a lot directly, but the next step for us will be having face-to-face meetings with those. I say face-to-face, but video conferences. We are meeting with the Indigenous communities, or we've started that engagement. Every agency that you can imagine has been contacted, and we've had several forms of public engagement, including two very well participated or very two surveys that have been very highly participated in by the public. Next slide, please. So phase 2 activity is now in process. So we're identifying alternative solutions to problems and opportunities. We're looking at the options we have. Where we're not working within an established road allowance, and where it's greenfield is a term that you're probably familiar with, we have to inventory the natural, cultural, social, and economic environment. And when we talk about environmental assessment, we're talking about broad environmental factors like it's in this last line that I mentioned here. Not just the birds and the bees. It's very broad and pretty well anything's open for discussion. We have to identify the impacts of alternative solutions. We have to evaluate the alternative solutions. And then we consult the key review agencies, the Conservation Authority, MTO, MECP, and basically walk through what our preferred alternatives are. And then we, once we've heard from everybody and got our numbers correct, then we select and confirm a preferred solution. So that work's going on right now. Next slide, please. Here's an update on our schedule. And for various reasons, we have slipped. We still think the technical work will pretty well be done in most cases over the summer of this year. With the council election and with Amherst West going on and the provincial election, there's a bunch of different issues out there. We'll probably see where this project will be formally completed in 2023, early 2023, with all the public consultation and the final approval from Ministry of Environment, that sort of thing. Next slide, MJ. So here's our first question break. I've just given an overview, and if there's any questions, we'll take them. If not, we'll move on to Rami's section.
Any questions, anybody? Not seeing any. Think we understand the process.
Okay. It parallels a lot to what the Planning Act requires on the secondary plan, so it makes for an easier discussion.
Okay, can everyone hear me all right, first of all?
But sorry?
Can everyone hear me?
I think so. Everybody can hear Rami? I'm seeing nods. Go ahead.
Perfect. Well, first of all, thank you, Dave, and good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. So the next part of this presentation is to go over some growth planning for the township over the study period, which is until 2046, and also look at the water and wastewater demands over that time period. So really, why is this important? The whole purpose of this exercise is to plan for the township infrastructure for the next 20 plus years. And we want to make sure that the infrastructure is sized in such a way that it will serve the community that it's meant to serve properly over its lifespan. So the way we want to think about this is if you're thinking about buying a new vehicle, obviously you want it to do everything that you need it to do, but avoiding the fact that you wouldn't necessarily get a very large truck, for example, if you weren't going to use it, because then you would be stuck paying for the gas and maintenance or costs on that vehicle, which you wouldn't necessarily need to incur. So infrastructure is very similar. You want it to be sized that it'll meet everything, it'll do everything you want it to do without going too big, because then the operating costs do become unnecessarily high. So with that in mind, MJ, next slide, please. So the nice thing here is that, obviously we're looking at what will the township look like in 2046. We had a starting point in a growth study that was commissioned by Hempson in 2019. The previous presentation referred to us. So it's the same study where the consultant presented a reference scenario for what will happen to the township between 2016 and 2046 in terms of population, dwellings, and employment. So we're going to talk about this a few times and talk or make reference to what's called a reference scenario, which is the most likely scenario that is likely to occur based on current conditions. And you can see these, oops, sorry, previous slide. And you can see these on the graph on the right, where the blue line is population, yellow is dwellings, and orange is employment. And then those shaded areas is the high and low. So realistically, we're probably somewhere in those shaded areas. Most realistically, we're probably in that blue line, but time will tell. Overall, one note is just that housing is projected to outpace population growth, which means that the number of people per household is going to decline from about 2.7 to 2.3, according to this growth study. Next slide, please. So the nice thing is that the growth study was commissioned in 2019. It is now 2022. And since 2016, we've had the benefit of 5 years worth of data that we can actually see, hey, how is this first little bit of the growth study actually going, and how are we tracking relative to what was projected in that reference scenario that we talked about. So for the township as a whole, and we are mostly going to be talking about dwellings for the next little bit because this is an infrastructure project. It makes a bit more sense to look at dwelling growth rather than population growth. So that's what these numbers on the screen are. So in 2016, the number of dwellings was 6,430 and the township is in its entirety, with the projected growth. The reference study projected 6,960 by the end of 2021, and we were able to calculate 7,005. So very close in terms of projected versus actual. And one note here, the calculated numbers are actually based on the number of building permits that were issued in each year over that time period. So even though those houses may or may not be occupied because the building permit was issued, we still count those as a dwelling because it is built and theoretically could be needing water and wastewater. So we can actually take this a step further and go a bit more granular and look at individual areas of the township. So again, keeping it consistent with a growth study, we look at Amherst, Odessa, Bath, and then rural areas of the township and Amherst Island as the 4 study areas, and look at how did growth occur in the last 5 years compared to what was supposed to happen. So in Amherst View, pretty much bang on, 3770 versus 3743 observed, so not bad. Odessa, we did see a lot of growth, especially in the latter half of the last 5-year period. So it was actually 22% higher than projected. Bath, a little bit slower than projected, but we'll touch on that in a second. And then rural areas of the township in Amherst Island did grow a little bit faster than was projected. So based on that, the team felt it would be prudent to maybe revise some of those growth numbers a little bit and try to err a bit more on that higher end of the shaded area that we talked about last slide. So we'll go over that in a bit more detail in the next 4 slides. Next slide, please, MJ. Okay, so I'm going to take a second to go over these graphs because we are going to see them about 3 more times after this one. So the orange dots are the observed growth, so the number of dwellings in each year between 2016 and 2021. The blue line is what the reference scenario projected would happen for dwellings in Amherst View during that time. And the gray dots line at this point, in this particular graphic converts, it's hard to tell the difference, but the gray line is what we are proposing as a revised growth scenario. And then that yellow horizontal line is once everything that is currently committed but unbuilt, so anything that's draft plan approved, so anything that's planned to be built but not currently built is built out. That's how many dwellings we project in that area as a whole. So it's existing dwellings plus committed but unbuilt takes us to yellow. So for Amherst View, like I said, the projected growth matched observed growth very closely, which is great. So based on that, we felt it reasonable to stick to the reference scenario that was projected by the growth study in 2019, which is consistent with what the secondary plan is doing. And then the other thing that we can take from this is there are approximately 448 committed but unbuilt residential units remaining in Amherst View. So by the time these are built out at these rates, they should be done by about 2028, which again is consistent with what we saw or what is being looked at in the secondary plan process. So it's good that these 2 documents, although they are separate, do align with each other. That's always a positive sign. Next slide, please, MJ. So looking at Odessa, here we can see those lines start to diverge a little bit. So again, as a reminder, blue is what the consultant thought would happen. Orange is what actually happened. So starting in 2020 and 2021, growth in Odessa just ballooned based on building permits that were issued. So really based on that, one thing that we can observe is that the number of dwellings in Odessa in 2021 is almost as high as what was projected to happen in 2046. So clearly, the prudent thing here would be to develop a revised growth scenario that would account for this, which is why we developed that gray line. And it is not prudent to take those last three orange dots and just draw a line straight through them. That's not sustainable. So we're kind of somewhere in the middle in what we think would be reasonable. And again, there's 280 committed but unbuilt residential units left in Odessa. So by the time these are done, we're looking at about 2037, 2038. So a fair amount of building left there. Moving on to Bath. Thank you. So again, we did note that the observed growth was actually a little bit lower than what was projected. But based on stakeholder consultation, so talking to a few developers and field observation, in the sense that a lot of servicing went in the last year, and that's not necessarily reflected in the observed growth numbers, it would be prudent to actually also develop a high growth scenario here. Just again, this is based on, and this is crystal balling a little bit, but just based on some of the things that we've seen in the field, it's a little bit more conservative to just plan for a bit more rapid growth. Now, the interesting thing about Bath is that there's a lot of capacity that is committed but unbuilt, just based on developer agreements for when the water and wastewater plants were built. So that's why those numbers are a lot higher than what we saw for Odessa and Amherst View. And in this case, it's 1,533 committed but unbuilt units, not projected to be done anytime soon based on these growth rates. Well beyond the end of the study period. And then the other thing to note is that actually by the time these units are done, the village of Bath will actually double in size, which is something to keep in mind. And then the last one on these ones, next slide, MJ, please, thank you, is Amherst Island and the rural areas of the township. So again, observed higher growth than what was anticipated here. So based on that, the prudent thing to do would just be develop those revised growth projections here as well. And one thing to note is that this growth is actually projected to mainly occur on the mainland, not so much on the island itself. So just something to keep in mind there. Next slide, please. So as a summary, the growth rates in the township as a whole did match what was projected in the growth study, but out of an abundance of caution and making sure that the infrastructure is adequately sized for the foreseeable future, we felt it safe to develop high growth scenarios for Odessa, Bath, and Amherst Island, as well as rural areas of the township. So if we look at the initial growth study reference scenario by the end of the study period, so 2046, the reference scenario had 9,730 dwellings in the township. We bumped that up to 10,362, which is about 6% higher. So that's that cushion really to account for the higher growth rates that we've seen in the last few years in a way that's reasonable. Next slide, please, MJ. And then this slide here is just a note. So we talk a lot about growth in the last little while has really accelerated, and we need to get on this train and just be very careful on that, which is more than fair for sure. But one thing to note is if we actually go back to 2001, looking at 5-year increments, so 2001 to 2006 and so on and so forth, the yearly growth between 2016 and 2021 is on par with what we've seen in previous segments. If we look from 2006 to 2011, it was actually higher than what we saw from 2016 to 2021. So just something to keep in mind, if even though we might have 1 or 2 years that are really high, and looking at it on a taking a step back and taking a 5-year snapshot kind of tells us that this level of growth has been seen at the township before. So what we're proposing moving forward kind of tries to toe the line between, yes, there is a lot of rapid growth happening, but what have we learned from the past 20 years worth of data. So this might be a good time for a pause for questions before we move on to water and wastewater.
Okay, council.
Ooh, sorry, one last note. Next slide, please, MJ. So like I said, this is all talking about dwellings. If we look at population, it's just a very easy multiply it by 2.5. That's what we assume will be the average number of people per household. So we just take our dwellings in each year in each area, multiply it by 2.5, and that's our projected population. Now question time, sorry.
Thank you. Council, questions? I'm seeing none, but I will come back to the same, I'll say the nature of the question that I asked earlier in the previous report. These are well-engineered, well-calculated, and I certainly understand that these are the appropriate calculations with these predictions, but they are still predictions. If council, in its ultimate wisdom, makes the decision to be more aggressive than that, that can be built into this infrastructure management plan, can it not?
Yeah, especially when we start talking about water and wastewater, there's certainly mechanisms in place that can be employed that to make sure that any additional growth or any rapid growth is accounted for in water and wastewater planning for sure. And that reminds me of another point is, again, these are just projections and they're the best guess that we can make based on the available data. If 5-10 years from now we have this conversation again and we're within 10%, we've done a pretty good job. So just something to keep in mind as we look at these projections. I don't think we'll be within that 10%, but we can just set a reminder on our calendars and talk in 5 years.
Understood. Thank you.
The other thing I might just add, if I could, is we do also review these numbers on an annual basis in terms of water and sewage capacity as well. So we bring council the uncommitted reserve capacity calculations annually. And so we'll be able to track that. And as part of that reporting, we can report back and link back to the infrastructure master plan to let you know how things are going on an annual basis also.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
There's no other questions? No, keep going, Rami.
Awesome. Thank you. So with that in mind, we can now turn our attention to how will this growth actually impact water and wastewater treatment demand within the township. So there's a few things to consider. Residential demand is the big one, but then we also do have customers who fall into the industrial, commercial, and institutional demand. So we'll refer to it as ICI moving forward. And then the other one, which is committed but unbuilt residential units. So these units aren't built; they're not connected to either system, but the capacity required to service them does need to be set aside so that we don't over allocate the plant's capacity. We will make use of the term equivalent residential units a lot, so ERUs, and really what that is allows us to take the industrial or the ICI water use and convert it to residential use, and that really allows for like an apple-to-apple comparison. So, for example, if you have one industrial consumer or customer is the word, who uses about 100 cubic meters of water, so 100 times more than one household, that's still one connection, but that would really throw the numbers off. So converting it to an ERU, it would be about 100 ERUs, so 100 households, and really it allows us for a much easier comparison and a better snapshot of what is actually connected to the system. So with that in mind, next slide, please, MJ. We use the revised high growth scenarios to calculate residential and ICI demand over the study period. So we have, again, our best guess as to what's going to happen for the residential growth and subsequent demand. For ICI growth, we assume that it goes up at the same rate as residential growth. Again, best guess, anything can happen, but this seems like a conservative way of moving forward. And then after that is we look at historical data to figure out how much water does an actual average residential unit use. So for water, we look at the 3-year maximum daily flow that occurred over the last 3-year period. So what was the highest one-day demand for water? Whereas for wastewater, we look at the average daily flow demand for over 3 years. The reasoning there is that a water plant has to be able to produce the maximum possible demand. So if we think back to Vancouver 2008 Olympics during the gold medal hockey game, where everyone decided to flush their tanks at the same time, water demand spikes instantaneously. You got to be able to provide water for that. Whereas a wastewater plant can absorb high flows. So that's where the average kind of comes in there. Now we repeat this process for all 4 of the plants in the township. So 2 water plants, Fairfield and Bath, and then 2 wastewater plants, Amherst View and Bath sewage plant as well. So next slide, please, MJ. So for the Fairfield water plant, services both Amherst View and Odessa. Currently, the rated capacity is 8,000 cubic meters per day, and it has 4,085 ERU connections to the system. Just one more click forward, MJ, please. Thank you. So, the maximum daily flow was observed in 2020. It was 1.06 cubic meters per day per ERU. So that's the factor that we use, is if we have currently 4,085 ERUs and we multiply it by 1.06, then the 2021 demand feasibly should be slightly more than 4,085.
Remy, if
yes.
I could just for a second, I note in that calculation, you've got 4,085 ERUs.
Mm-hmm.
You've got 4,000 of them residential and 600 of them ICI. Wouldn't that add up to 4,685?
Yeah, I think so. So there's a slight typo there.
Okay,
so
I just made sure I understood the math.
Yeah, so I believe the number in your report should be accurate. So I do apologize for that. If it's not, we'll be sure to correct that, but it's in that ballpark. So next slide, please, MJ. So what that translates to is, again, we superimpose that to the projected residential growth and then use our factor to look at ICI growth. Then we have this graph. So again, we're going to repeat this 4 times. So let's just take a second to go over it. The blue shaded area is the water demand for residential connections. Orange is ICI. The yellow shaded area is all that committed but unbuilt units. So again, this isn't water coming out of the plant, but it's capacity that has to be accounted for. The light blue is the amount of available capacity left over time. And then Fairfield is a bit of a different situation because there's one more category that we have to account for, and that's purchased but unused ICI capacity. So there's about 4 or 5 commercial users that have pre-purchased set capacities from the plant. So they're guaranteed a certain volume of water, but they don't necessarily use it. So even though the flow doesn't come out of the plant, we can't allocate it to anyone else without going back and changing those agreements. So on average, the amount of flow that's not used is that gray area. We've just left it constant over the study period because again, anything could happen. So there's not much point in speculating. And then the last part, so this graph maxes out at that 8,000 cubic meter capacity of the plant itself. And the green bar across is 80% of the plant capacity. So once we get to that 80% mark, the alarm bells go off. It's time to start planning for plant expansion. So going back to those mechanisms that we talked about during your question, Mr. Mayor, is once we hit that mark, we really need to start planning for additional capacity. So if we hit that mark earlier, we do look at those numbers every year. So we'll be able to have that warning sign that it's actually now time to start looking at when it's now time to start looking at expansion. And then the blue dots is the actual flows out of the plant. So flows out of the plant really are the blue and orange shaded areas. So it superimposes quite well with the historical data. And then everything above that line, so gray and yellow is not coming out of the plant, but it needs to be accounted for. And blue is what you could go out and allocate in a given year. So based on these projections, we think that the 80% mark will be hit around 2033, which is when the township should start planning for expansion. And then the other thing that jumps out on this graph is the plant capacity itself isn't projected to be hit in 2046 based on these numbers. Yeah, so any questions on that?
Actually, I have one again. The Fairfield Water Treatment Plant, as I understand it, is a series of cartridges in giant swimming pools. And we can add more cartridges to the existing swimming pools, if you will. So expanding our capacity without expanding the physical building. What would be the top end of that?
Good question. I actually looked at those numbers today, so I can give them to you. So with the so the way these cartridges work is it's a series of pumps downstream of it pull water through a bunch of membranes. So the harder the pumps go, the more water you can pull through. So at their maximum capacity with the existing cartridges right now, the filters themselves or the membranes themselves could put out 10,750 cubic meters of water. However, we don't have the exact number for what everything around those cartridges can handle, right? So the pipes that are associated with it, and then the clear wells and the contact chambers and the low lifts and the high lifts, those might not necessarily be rated to 10,750. So as part of the infrastructure master plan, we will be investigating that to figure out what would need to happen for the plant to be able to put out 10,750. And to add to that, if we were to, there's a bunch of empty slots inside each swimming pool that can be filled with more cartridges and more membranes. And if everything there is absolutely maxed out, that can actually take again, just that part of the treatment process up to 15,000 cubic meters per day, which is a sizable increase, but with the caveat that everything around it needs to be sized appropriately as well.
Bigger pipes. Understood.
Bigger pipes,
okay.
Bigger pumps.
And thank you. I noticed that all of your colleagues snicker when you have to say swimming pools because I called it that.
I mean, technically it is. Anything can be a swimming pool. So yeah, so that's Fairfield. Moving on to Bath Water. So services both the Village of Bath and then a couple of CSC or Correctional Services Canada institutions. So the plant as a whole has a rated capacity of 6,000 cubic meters per day, but 2672 of that is automatically assigned to CSC based on previously existing agreements, which leaves 3328 for the village. Hopefully the math here is right, but I'm really quite, no, not even close. Wow, sorry about that. The bottom two bullets are correct. 1,000 residential ERUs, 389 ICIs for whatever that works out to. So again, really apologies on that one. One more top forward, MJ, please. The maximum daily flow per ERU was in the last 3 years was observed in 2019. It has been going down steadily since. So that's the number that was used in the calculations. One note before we move forward is we can see that the daily flow per ERU in 2020, 2021 has gone down, and that's on account of the utilities team doing a lot of good work to reduce leaks. And you know, if we were to have the same exact conversation next year and the number was below 1, then a whole lot of capacity just magically appears there by virtue of this methodology. So there's a lot of benefit associated with tracking down leaks and fixing them, because that's just a way to get additional capacity without necessarily having to expand the plant. Next slide, please, MJ. So going back to our trusty graphs, the potable water demand is not projected to be, the capacity of the plant is not projected to be hit by 2046. 80% should occur around 2038. However, I will draw your attention to the light blue shaded area, which goes down to about 0 in 2034. So what that means is there's a couple hundred units of water that could be allocated now. That number will go down gradually over time. So just something to keep in mind for the Bath water plant itself. Do we want to take a question here, or do we want to move on to sewage?
Questions? No, keep going.
Perfect. Almost there, I promise. Amherst View Water Pollution Control Plant. So also services Amherst View and Odessa. Rated capacity here is 6,400 cubic meters per day. 4421 ERUs, so just shy of 4,000 residential, 483 ICIs. So the 3-year average is 0.92 meters cubed per day per ERU, which gives us, next slide please, this graph. So over here, again, not projecting that the capacity of the plant will be exceeded over the study period, and we should be around 80% in 2032. A couple notes here is you'll actually notice the trending on those blue dots, which is the actual flows observed, how it's actually going down, even though the population is going up. So a couple reasons there, reducing leaks into the system is one, and then just drier years is another, right? So the sewage collection system is subject to precipitation, which is also something that we are working on as part of this project, is trying to develop an inflow and infiltration program to reduce the amount of leaks going into the system, so that we can try to increase capacity without increasing the plant or doing much work on it. So just something to keep in mind there. And then the other thing is, even though the plant itself the capacity there shouldn't be hit over the study period, as individual parts of the treatment processes will be reviewed just to make sure that, suppose part of the aeration system goes down, that we can still meet capacity later on in the study period. So just a note there that that is something that we're also looking at as part of the study. Last but not least, bath sewage. So rated capacity, just over 3,000 cubic meters per day. 909 of that goes to CSC, leaving 2,099 for the village. 1156 connections to the system in 2021, and then 90 ICIs. So where does that leave? Yep, next slide, please. Thanks. So where does that leave us? So again, not projecting that the capacity of the plant will be exceeded in 2046. If anything, we're maybe going to hit 80% by the end of the study period. So same caveat here, the plant as a whole is probably fine, but we want to make sure that every single part of the system is fine as well. Sorry, my dog is getting a drink of water, which might be distracting to the audience, so I apologize for that. But we can move on to the next slide. So just a couple of things to keep in mind is that the projections that we just showed is kind of a business as usual forecast. Is, it doesn't assume any additional capacity being allocated. It doesn't assume any new heavy ICIs moving into the township. So those are scenarios that we do need to keep in mind before making recommendations as to how to move forward with the plant and allocating capacity. So, for example, we have the available capacity of each plant, both in meters cubed per day and ERUs, in this table here. So about 1,300 ERUs could be allocated at Fairfield, 1,500 at Amherst Sewage, 200 in Bath Water, and sorry, again, typo there. That should be 377 at Bath Sewage. So there is capacity right now, but that will gradually go lower over time, just based on nothing happening right now. But there are two scenarios that we can look at. So MJ, next slide, please. The first one being, what would happen if council decided to allocate, for example, and this is purely hypothetical, 1,000 units of water from the Fairfield water system tomorrow. So that that yellow shaded area would shoot up. The amount of available capacity would be 0 by 2040, after which point the plant would have to be expanded before any more capacity could be allocated. So that's scenario one. Moving on to scenario B, no additional capacity tomorrow, but a heavy ICI user moves into town and says, I need 300 cubic meters of water for my operations, which is, again, the equivalent of 300 households. So in this case, now we do approach that rated capacity of the plant by 2046, and the 80% threshold would occur about 5 years earlier. So not a huge deal. Again, this is fully manageable within the study period. But where it becomes interesting is what happens if both of these things happen at the same time, which leaves us to scenario A plus B. So individually, not a huge deal, but if you combine them, And if council were to allocate 1,000 units tomorrow, and then the next day a heavy ICI user were to arrive and request 300 cubic meters of water per day, then all of a sudden any available capacity is gone right then and there. Beyond 25, there would be nothing left to allocate, which could have some pretty significant impacts on growth within the township moving forward. Again, this could be managed through plant expansion activities, but it does take a bit of time to go through the design process, the permitting process, the approval process to expand the plant. So it's not something that can be done quickly. So these are just some things to keep in mind when making decisions on how to allocate capacity in the near term and the long term. So I think that's it for me, and I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Campbell.
Thank you. Okay, so my part is short, I promise. So just in terms of the suggestion that Rami was just discussing in terms of a potential user in the industrial park. So a few considerations for something like that. We did have this conversation a bit in the fall, but we just wanted to have a quick look at the implications of that potentially. So from a wastewater standpoint, staff continue to believe that the most financially sustainable method for sanitary sewage treatment for industries in the Taylor Kidd Industrial Park is for them to construct their own treatment facility or to use on-site treatment, so a septic system, if they're a low volume user. This is because we don't currently have sewage treatment available out there or any sewage piping in that network out there. So the cost of installing a pumping station and an extension from that site to County Road 6, as well as the connection fees or impost fees that would be charged to connect to the municipal system, would mean that it is likely more financially appropriate for that industry to install their own treatment from a wastewater perspective. In terms of process water, there are other industries in the Taylor Kidd Industrial Park that currently use a private process water system for fire. The system is currently operated by the cogeneration facility, and it was also used in the past for at least one industry for process water in addition to fire suppression water. So any industry could have the option to connect to this private system for process water needs or fire suppression needs, which we understand to be relatively affordable. And they also would have the opportunity to install their own process water system if required. On the potable water side, it's just a little bit different from sanitary because there is a water main out there, which is, it goes from Amherst View to along Highway 33, north on Jim Snow Drive, and west on Taylor Kidd Boulevard to the east side of the cogeneration plant currently. The pressure in this water main is such that it cannot be used for fire suppression purposes. So it's only provided for domestic use, so for staffing and that sort of thing, or very low capacity process needs. So our determination in some of the thinking that we've done on this is that industries will likely find that there's a capacity threshold where the usage under that threshold may result in a connection to the municipal system being a reasonable thing to do, whereas usage above that threshold might mean that economies of scale would make a private water treatment facility more appropriate. So it's hard for us to assess what this threshold is, but the reason Rami used that 300 cubic meters per day number in his example is because we think it might be around there. But we do feel that for industries requiring above that threshold, they would likely move toward their own private treatment facility because the economies of scale would mean that the life cycle cost of constructing and operating that facility would be more financially viable for them. So we just wanted to note that to council. On the next slide, both Dave and Rami alluded to some next steps that we have with the development community. So we're expecting to plan for formal allocation of some capacity in addition to the existing draft plan and site plan approvals as part of this infrastructure master plan process. So what I'm saying is, at the end of this process, when we come with a final report, we will likely have a recommendation to council about capacity that can be allocated in each of the systems for future growth. I just want to note that the formal allocation of capacity doesn't happen until a draft plan is registered or a site plan is registered. So I just want to make that completely clear to everyone. So we're finalizing the analysis, but based on the numbers that Rami was showing earlier in terms of available capacity at each of the plants, we believe that there's approximately 5 to 10 additional years of building in Amherst View, in the Fairfield and Loyalist East systems that could be allocated without undertaking any further construction or expansion of these treatment facilities. And there may be some more limited capacity in Bath, but still some capacity that could be allocated in Bath, although, as Rami noted, the majority of this capacity is allocated to development companies within the community of Bath. So we are planning to increase our consultation efforts with the developers that we know are active within the township, as well as the Kingston Home Builders Association later this month. The goal of this engagement is to gather information about the lands that are owned by the developers, including, what their approximate plans are in terms of density, number of units, those sorts of things that they're aiming for in the eventual development of their lands, as well as the desired timing for their growth. Obviously, these plans are subject to planning requirements and other approvals. But we want to be able to consider those development plans and how they reconcile with the growth projections that were presented tonight. And it will allow us to appropriately plan within the infrastructure master plan what projects we need to undertake, what the costs are of those projects, and what the schedule of those projects need to be for projects such as treatment plant capacity expansion, as Rami mentioned, construction of increased water storage or sewage pumping stations or trunk main installations and those sorts of projects. So it's really important for us to understand the timing of some of those developments a little bit better. So we're hoping to get some good engagement from our development partners so that we can get a better understanding of their plans to work them into our plan. That's it for me. I think we're going back to, any questions here? And then we'll go back to Mr. Thompson.
Don't see any questions at this time. I would note that it's about 3 minutes to 10 and we're losing people. All right, Dave, I don't know how much further you've got. Is this a wrap up or is this?
I think 5 minutes and we're good.
Okay. Thank you.
We'll go fast here. So next slide, MJ. I'm going to talk about problems and opportunities. Next slide. And I'm not going to list all the projects there. I put a long scroll there, and that list is really that long, and it's in your appendix. If you have any questions on any of those projects, just contact any of the project team identified, and we can answer them at a later date or tonight if there's time. I'm just going to focus on a few examples of how we're using the themes and what differentiates an IMP project from a life cycle project, et cetera. And Jenna kind of alluded to this a second ago, but one practical aspect is that projects identified with a growth component can be partially funded by DC or impost fee revenue. So it's important to identify those, get that money rolling and that sort of thing. And I'm just going to go off script here a little bit. And I know the mayor has identified an aggressive growth thing, and time will tell where that number is. But I'm familiar with a number where 1 cubic meter of sewage treatment or a potable water treatment 10-15 years ago was in the range of $2,000 to $3,000 a cubic meter sort of thing. So one represents one house. So that means if you overshoot in your building by, a sizable amount, that means there's an investment sitting out there with no way to fund it, or, it's difficult to fund it, put it that way. So the importance of monitoring the growth rates, as Jenna mentioned and Rami mentioned, is very important, because it gives you that early warning system. And it's more important to have all your ducks in order, ready to go when you are ready, but not to get too large. Anyways, next slide, please. Okay, so one of the things, I go back to the themes: growth, climate change, remedial projects, technology change, and regulatory change. That's what's driving the projects we're looking at. They're new projects. There's infrastructure that aren't around, or they're major improvements to what we have. We're not talking about life cycle costs, or like repaving a road is a life cycle cost, or fixing an old water main. Those aren't what we're up for. So, when we're analyzing the work that needs to be done, I'll use the Main Street Bath from Fairfield Street to the east limits, a section that hasn't been rebuilt. We're looking at, what kind of storm sewers are we going to need? The urbanization pressures of that right away. It was built as a highway. There's no sidewalks. We need new sidewalks. So those sidewalks, new storm sewers would be IMP projects, where paving the road or fixing the water main that's under that road right now that's 50 years old is the life cycle cost, and would not be the IMP. Putting in the Windermere intersection, whether that's a roundabout or signals, would be an IMP project. Next slide, MJ. We're looking at remedial projects. So I use, we expect there'll be a phase 2 to the shoreline protection on Amherst Island. The phase 1, I believe, is scheduled for this summer, weather permitting and all that sort of thing. But there's a lot of coastline there that's failing, and it's going to take some money later down the road. These are lesser priority sites, but still need the work. And next slide, MJ. New technology, just examples are autonomous vehicles, and it all sounds good, and then we don't know when it's going to actually happen. But just going through the literature and pardon me, I'm just going to grab a quick drink. Things as simple as the guidance instruments on these vehicles need a wider center line to operate properly. It means going to every road and repainting them, different signage and standardization of everything from curb heights to approaches to intersections, all that sort of thing, all have to be revisited. And on the regulatory side, not so much as on some of the other infrastructure, but things like road salt is sort of a hot topic that we're going to have to come up with new ways to both use that as a resource and use less of it, sort of thing. Next slide, MJ. We don't really have a lot of stormwater growth, except for what you heard with the Amherst West project in terms of municipal infrastructure. There'll be stormwater new subdivisions, but the facilities that the municipality will take on in terms of stormwater management ponds, we don't see a lot of that. We don't see big projects. Regulatory stormwater is a really big, active, moving area with the Ministry of Environment. So there's a lot of stuff happening now that we're reporting on. Next slide. Our main time is being spent on reviewing the minor storm. Our existing systems working, causing us any grief? And are we able to handle the big storm with our major systems? Do we have the outlets to let that big storm get out and drain properly? So a couple things have been identified through that process. Next slide. We talked about, Randy's talked about the water and growth projects for water and wastewater. We're also looking at all the other components, the wastewater, the storage systems, the piping, truck water services. Not just for Amherst West, but for every community. Next slide. We're also, looking at what will help our infrastructure. So Rami mentioned the I&I. On the sewer side, the other side is our non-revenue water. There's continues to be a big fraction of water that we produce at the water plant that we don't get any revenue for. That number is down, but it's still a measurable number. So any improvements on that percentage is money we don't have to spend on new capacity. Regulatory and new technology. The regulatory side has been relatively quiet, but you know, with climate change, the water chemistry in the lake is changing. You know, there's a discussion on pharmaceuticals, that sort of thing in the water that you know keeps us on our toes. So we're looking at those issues too. Next slide. The Bass sewage plant has some operational issues. So even though the growth side is good, as Remy said, we have to look at all the separate processes within that system. And to tell you the truth, each component has some issues there. So that's a major project that's probably going to be surfaced as we get our recommendations together. Next slide. So I just mentioned the sewage plant. One of the opportunities is evaluate improvements to sludge management. We spend a lot of money to get rid of sludge, and the sludge is about 95 to 97% water. So if we can come up with a way to effectively manage that, then there's some big savings there. I didn't mention opportunities, what I meant by that, but I'll use an example. The county is going to be resurfacing Main Street, Odessa. They're going to be digging up the asphalt, the gravel. There's an opportunity for the township to sneak in there and replace its water and sewer as required before the county puts all their gravel and new asphalt back. So that's what an opportunity is. So when I say problems and opportunities, we take advantage of things when we can. Next slide. One of the things that's come through is modular membranes for sewage treatment, and there may be an opportunity to apply that at the Amherst facility to give us some incremental expansion without doing big civil heavy duty tankage and that sort of thing. So that's something we're looking at. I'm going to skip to the next slide because of time. And looking at here, the one thing I want to make sure council is aware of, we are required to maintain a project file with all of our public correspondence. So we're encouraging everybody to use the infrastructure master plan email address with any questions, and we sure they'll get a quick written response. Or they can call through to the number that's there. And on the next slide is the email for the project team. So if you have any follow-up questions, any one of us can answer that question. And just, I do this for a living these days. So if you want to start with me and I feed it out to the rest of them as I need, sort of thing. So that's the end. The council questions.
Okay, unfortunately, we also lost Councillor Parks along the route. We are down to just the four of us. We do still have quorum, so we're fine that way. But council, do we have questions with regard to this report at this time? I think it's a lot of information. I'm glad we've got it in printed form, and we can continue to review and move forward and provide comments as time permits. It may require further conversations down the road, but really glad to have received this kind of overall update for this project at this time. So thank you. Council, this time, unless there's something specific, I will look for a motion to receive the update. Councillor Town, and second by Deputy Mayor. Any comment? I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Motion is carried. Thank you. I would note that the regulation and license of transportation companies, rideshare, Mr. Silver had to step away. He will bring that to us at our next council meeting for review at that time. That brings us to the end, unless there's any new business. And seeing none, and opportunities for members to speak, I guess we just go to adjournment. And can I get a motion? The deputy, seconded by Councillor Gordon. Okay, any comment? I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Motion is carried. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, folks. It's been a long night, but and we got through and a lot of really good information to move us forward. Thank you all. Have a good night.